The boy watched as people rode a horse towards him. He told two girls that they were approaching. One of the girls replied that she understood him. The other said that she would take care of the young lady. The little girl grabbed the girl by the pant leg. She called the guy her father and said that she wished him luck. The girl screamed loudly for him to defeat them. He replied that he would do whatever she ordered. The guy used the ability to compress the earth. The guy on the horse screamed in horror because a man had just appeared out of nowhere. He tried to hit him with a spear. The guy calmly used the chi sword, the light step technique. He hit him on the head, and he lost consciousness. A man in armor came up to him and said, "It's done. Swordsman, Japan." A guy was walking down the street of a noisy city. He looked at his phone and said that it was the end of next week and the year would end. How boring. He received a message. The guy asked in surprise what it was. The message asked him that he wanted to go to another world. He didn't notice and started crossing the road on a red light. Someone shouted at him to stop. It was dangerous there. The guy looked at the person shouting at him in surprise. He didn't manage to escape. He was hit by a truck. He lay on the ground and listened to the screams. People were saying loudly that there had been an accident. A high school student had been hit by a truck. Someone had called an ambulance. The doctor had said that his bones were broken. The guy thought that his body, he does not feel it. The guy closed his eyes. A man stood above him and looked at him carefully. The guy jumped up and screamed loudly that he was dead. The man replied that yes, it was. The guy started waving his arms, but they were intact. He looked at the man and said that he remembered there being a truck in front of him. The man smiled broadly. The boy asked loudly who he was and where he was now. He turned his head and saw the city below. The guy shouted loudly that it was a city and he was now on a cloud. The man hit him with a cane and said that he was too noisy. If he moved too much, he would fall. The boy shouted loudly that he should not hit him with a stick. The man looked at him and said that the youth nowadays are so rude. He asked him that he knew that God was standing in front of him. The guy responded without emotion that he was fine. The man asked what was wrong with his reaction. The guy responded that his grandma's last will was never to believe anyone who says he is God. The man thought for a moment and said that it was true. As soon as he told her, she said that he was an old liar. The guy thought how his granny could answer like that. The guy said, amazed, "That's right, Grandma. She decided that she was arguing nonsense if she ended up in front of God. He was definitely God." The guy asked that he had met him by mistake. God sat down on a chair and answered that no. Now they should return to the main thing. He thought for a while and said that, so, by his mistake. God fell silent, and the guy sighed in surprise. The man said his name was Sansui. The boy said, well, yeah. The god awkwardly said that, well, his name didn't sound like a teenager's name, and he'd made a mistake by blowing out the candle of his life. Sansui said angrily that it was time for him to retire. God said that he was here forever. The boy answered irritably that he was happy, that he was very lucky. The man fell silent and looked at the boy. After a short pause, God awkwardly said that because of his mistake, he was sending him to another world. Sansui was shocked to hear that he was being sent to another world. He jumped up and down joyfully and shouted that this was a great development at the end of his life. God replied that it was good. He understood. The man opened a box with paper and ink. God said that he would give him power so that he would not die. He could choose any. Sansui happily asked that he could choose any power he wanted. God took the paper in his hands and confidently answered that yes, he only needed to say it. Sansui joyfully shouted that he wanted to be the strongest man on earth. God told him to stop. He asked Sansui that he wasn't ashamed to say such a thing. The boy happily replied that it was true. He had dreamed of this since childhood. God awkwardly said okay. He wrote the words on the paper and said for Sansui to take this letter. One day he will meet someone. He should give this to him. God added that this man would teach him. The boy sighed in surprise. The man said that as long as Sansui became the strongest, he would guide. The boy cried out in surprise, what did he mean? God replied that he needed to work hard to become strong. The main thing is that he doesn't forget to give this letter. It's time for him to go. God kicked the cloud and it split into two. Sansui screamed loudly for him to wait. God pushed him and the boy started to fly away. He screamed loudly, and God just waved goodbye. The boy found himself in the forest. He said that he was sent to this forest and did not give any instructions. Sansui remembered God's words that he should not forget to give this letter. The guy said that the story with the letter was the most important thing he had said. He heard a noise and asked in fear what it was. Was there someone here now? There was a guy standing on a tree branch. He replied that, yes. He felt uneasy, but how lovely to meet someone from another world. Sansui looked at him in surprise and thought how he was standing on such a tiny branch. The boy jumped down from the branch and approached Sanushi. He looked at him carefully and said that he did not seem dangerous. The boy asked what he was looking for in this forest. Sansui stared at him in shock. The guy said that if his guess was correct, it would take 7 minutes to walk to her. Sansui asked in surprise, what, his teacher? The boy asked him with interest what he meant. Sansui thought that this boy was his teacher. He needed to give the letter to him. He had to do as God said. Sansui awkwardly handed him the letter and told him to take it and read it. The guy asked what it was, a presentation letter. He unfolded the letter and began to read it carefully. He made a sad face and asked if he wanted to be the strongest in the world or if he had problems with his head. God wanted him to shake this nonsense about being the strongest out of him. Sansui thought awkwardly that he was very ashamed. The guy asked him what he knew and who was Kensei. Sansui looked at him with interest. The guy said that, apparently not. He sighed and said that it was fine. He would make him his disciple. Sansui awkwardly replied that he thanked him very much. The boy said that it was fine. He would study that style used by the hermits. The guy smiled widely and said that training would be difficult. He should be prepared for it. Sansui thought in shock that he was seriously saying this now. The guy said that he didn't think he had any talent. Sansui made a sad face, but didn't object. The guy said mockingly that most likely, in 500 years, he would be able to become the strongest man on earth. Sansui shouted in shock that he needed 500 years, but he would already be dead by then. There was no way to become the strongest any faster. The guy looked at him in surprise. He said that there is no quick way to become stronger. He does not have to worry about his life as long as he studies with him. 500 years will fly by. Sansui said with tears in his eyes that he only wanted a girl and authority. That's all. The guy happily said that he has been studying for thousands of years and still hasn't finished his studies. There is no end to studying. The boy was jumping on the branches when suddenly he saw an old house. He jumped on the roof. After that, he went inside and saw a wooden sword. Sansui came running up to him, out of breath, calling him master. He was trying to catch his breath after running through the forest for so long. The guy put his sword on his shoulder and told him with a smile that he had finally caught up with him. Sansui, breathing heavily, loudly asked how he jumped on the ends of branches. The boy scratched his chin and answered that he did it with the help of a technique that makes the body lighter. The master laughed and added with a smile that it wouldn't be long before he could use it too. Sansui said tiredly that he thought it definitely wouldn't be any time soon. The boy handed him the weapon and told him to take it. Sansui asked what it was. A wooden sword. The master replied that his training would be simple. Every day at sunrise, he would take the sword and swing it. The guy added that he would swing until the sun set, and there would be no end to his swings without his instructions. Sansui looked at the sword in surprise and said that he had to swing it endlessly. The master asked with a smile what they were starting. He stood in a stance with his wooden sword and said that only one quality was important: his determination to continue training. The boy added that he should remember this, and one day he would become the strongest. Sansui thought that this was how his 500 years of training began. He continued to reason that he soon realized how difficult life in this world was. He began daily training with his master Suiboku. The first years were harsh. He would start striking with his sword at sunrise and it would last until night. Then he would go to sleep to meet the dawn and start training again. At first he was often hungry. Soon, after some time, the feeling of hunger began to settle, which for his master, it seemed that sages like him only needed a haze to continue living. They don't need worldly food. With the thought that he had no other choice, he continued his training day after day, learning everything new that the master taught him. He didn't even notice how his old-school uniform became the master's kinagashi. Many years passed, it seemed, in an instant. Even after 500 years, the gap between him and the master had not become any smaller. While he was aware of his lack of preparation, Intruders had entered the forest. Sansui shouted to the master that someone was there. Two boys quickly jumped from branch to branch. Siboku said worriedly that this was the first time anyone had entered this forest since his arrival. Sansui told the master that yes, that was true. He sensed two weak intruders and wolves. The master replied that yes, they had to hurry. They ran to the clearing and saw how the wolves were eating a man. It was a girl who covered the child with her back. Siboku said that he saw that they were late. The boys jumped into the clearing, and the wolves ran in different directions. Sansui took the little baby in his arms. The boy told the master in surprise that it was fate or something else, but the child survived. Saboku said tiredly that, on the contrary, it was a big problem for them. He asked the boy to listen to him carefully and why he shouldn't raise him. Sansui sighed in surprise and looked at the child who was sleeping in his arms. The kid heard someone speaking and opened his eyes. Sansui hesitantly said that he did not have the immortal power of chi. The master said that he was right. Saiboku said that he could feel the magic coming from the child, so becoming a sage didn't seem impossible to him. But it wasn't necessary. He could raise him in the human world. The child grabbed Sansui's finger. The boy said that the master was right. Sanboku said that his student Sansui was going to the world of people and would gain experience there as a sage and as a swordsman. The master added that he should consider this part of his training. He is sure that 500 years of training here and the techniques he taught him have made him even stronger. Sanboku confidently said that he must raise the child as his own. Sansui replied that yes, he understood. The master smiled broadly and said that he would leave everything to him, his student. He was so proud of him. Sansui looked at the child and smiled tenderly. Sanboku looked at him and said that he was entrusted with the life of a human. Until he found a suitable home and raised the child properly, he was not allowed to return here. The master smiled broadly and added that he should not worry. For them, it would be a moment. Sansui confidently answered that yes, he would take care of his future and would definitely not tarnish the master's name. The boy added that he was going then. The master replied that it was good. Sansui jumped onto a branch and quickly disappeared. He stopped in front of a beautiful view and told the child that this was the beginning of their life together. Sansui began to ponder that, if he thought about it, he was surprised at how much power he had gained here, and wondered what the human world could give him. He confidently said that he had to find a job first so that the child would have something to eat. Sansui was running quickly across the field with a child who suddenly started crying loudly. He stopped and looked at the child in surprise. The boy asked anxiously what had happened. The baby ignored Sansui and continued to cry. He asked her if she was hungry, but he had no breast milk for her, and it would be difficult to get it. Sansui raised his head and said that there was a village in the distance, so there were people here. Coming closer, he saw that this tiny spirit with hope belonged to a baby. The mother should feed them both, but he approached a woman who was sitting on a bench and asked if she could feed his child, since his wife had died. Exclaiming that his wife had died, she asked if it was true. Sansui replied that, yes, he also didn't have any food to feed the child. He wasn't quite sure what to do now. He forced an awkward smile and said that, as she could see, he had absolutely nothing on him. Sansui shyly asked if she would mind feeding his child too. The woman replied that she did not mind and agreed to fulfill his request. Sansui thanked her, saying that she had helped him a lot. The woman picked up the girl and began to feed her. She told Sansui to know that there was no paid work in this area. He looked young, so perhaps they would have better luck if they both went to the capital. Sansui said to the capital. The woman showed them the road they could take and reach the capital in a few days. They needed to go in the direction she had shown them. Taking the girl away from her, the woman said that she should be full by now and handed her over to Sansui. After giving the girl to Sansui, the woman asked him to wait for her here. Sansui thought that this was part of the kingdom, but he had spent 500 years in this world and had never left the forest. He knew absolutely nothing about the society of this world. He thought with annoyance that he was obliged to raise this child, no matter what. The girl in his arms fidgeted and smiled. Watching her clumsy movements, Sansui smiled back at her. The woman called Sansui out of his thoughts and apologized for keeping him waiting. She handed him a bag of goat's milk, saying it was only a little, but it should be enough to get him to the capital. Sansui was surprised and exclaimed that he could actually take it. The woman said that it would spoil, even if he did not take it. Sansui thanked the woman and said that he would never forget her kindness. The woman laughed and lightly hit Sansui on the back, saying that he was a scoundrel and was now heading to the capital. Bracing himself so that the girl would not fall from his arms, Sansui agreed with the woman and replied that he would go his own way. Sansui suddenly jumped a long distance and accelerated to run. The woman, seeing this, fell into genuine shock. During his run, Sansui thought that someday he will have to pay her back while she is alive. There were numerous carriages ahead, drawn by horses. Sansui jumped up and pushed off the roof of one of them, flying over all the carriages at once. The men standing nearby were surprised and asked what it was. Maybe a bird. One of the male farmers said he thought it was a wind mage, but this mage was very fast. Sansui thought that compared to normal running, if he used light step to jump, he could move much faster. Suddenly Sansui felt a strange feeling, as if someone was looking at him murderously. Sansui turned around and thought it was a man with a thirst for blood. A fair-haired youth in noble clothes called out to Sansui to stop and stand still. Sansui landed on the ground and looked behind him. There stood a fair-haired youth in noble clothes. Sansui asked that it was wind magic and that it was the first time he saw it. What a wonderful ability! A fair-haired youth in noble clothes pulled his sword from his belt and pointed it at Sansui. He shouted at Sansui to be quiet because he was too impudent a peasant. The young man angrily shouted out whether Sansui knew whose carriage he had stepped on. If he had not checked or even recognized the crest, that in itself was a crime. Sansui thought that he must have accidentally landed on a VIP carriage. The blonde boy said that normally Sansui would lose his arm for this, but he seemed to care about the child, so the blonde boy might show a little sympathy for his circumstances. The blonde youth sheathed his sword and said that Sansui could address his mistress directly, having received her mercy. Sansui sighed in relief and said that he should be allowed to apologize for his misdeed. The young man told Sansui to follow him. He led Sansui to the carriage he had jumped on. There sat a young girl in noble clothes. Noticing that the young man had brought Sansui to her carriage, she addressed him by the name of Brower and asked him that he was the one who had been there before. Brower replied that it was true. It was him. Brower turned to Sansui and told him to now apologize. Sansui smiled awkwardly and replied that he was truly sorry. He was from the countryside and out of ignorance. He must have unknowingly stepped on the carriage earlier. The girl replied that, not to mention being from a rural area and not even knowing any manners, this is a sign of savagery. Sansui is no better than a wild monkey, even wearing rags instead of clothes. She asked worriedly if he understood the whole situation now. Next time you shouldn't disrespect their family crest. But especially that Sansui was the child's father, she would accept his apology for now. Sansui awkwardly forced out a laugh. The girl looked at him sharply and thought. Brower thought that this look. The girl rose sharply from her seat, and Brower extended his hand to her so that she could descend. The girl stood in front of Sansui and asked his name. He smiled and replied that his name was Shirokuro Sansui, repeating his name syllable by syllable. The girl said that she had never heard such a name, returning her gaze to Sansui. She said that his living situation was quite unstable right now. Therefore, he should come to her mansion, and if Sansui passed her test, she would be willing to offer him a job. The girl smirked and asked if that sounded acceptable to him. Sansui was inspired and smiled, asking if that was really okay. Brewer was taken aback by his mistress's suggestion and asked him to wait for her to make her proposal. Sansui thought that she must really be good. The girl looked at Sansui and said that her name was Dewey. She would soon become his mistress and hoped that Sansui would remember it. Bauer called out to the girl and said that for a lady like her with such a position and status, to get involved with such a person was too low for her. The girl harshly stopped Bauer's words and said that she had already decided everything. She asked Sansui to show her palm. He agreed. Sansui held out his hand so the girl could look at it. Muttering the usual rhyme, she said that Sansui's hand looked as if she had long been accustomed to holding a sword. Although Sansui looked the same age as her, Sansui thought that perhaps he was one of the oldest people on this planet. As for his age, they probably wouldn't believe him if he told them his. So he decided to just not talk about it. At least, that's what an adult would do. The girl looked away and asked Brower if he had noticed that not a grain of magic was coming from this man. Brower was surprised and exclaimed how he managed to jump like that. The girl, inspired, said that, in other words, he possessed a rare type of magic. Sansui thought that he was a rare type. He didn't know what they were talking about, but he should keep quiet for now. One day, his master told him that in another world, magic is everywhere, but that doesn't mean that everyone can use it. 99% of the entire population of all people are capable of using magical abilities. The remaining percent cannot use magic at all. This is all because these residents do not have the strength to activate magical abilities. Be that as it may, these people can still reproduce the same effects of magic, using not easy, like all people, but complex methods. Take, for example, their special rituals and ceremonies. Sansui continued to speculate that his sage skills might also fall into this category. The so-called rare magic is a term that generalizes all human abilities and skills other than magic. Dewey raised her head and said that, in general, Sansui would be able to work if he could actually use it. Sansui proudly raised his head and smiled, saying that it was enough for him that Dewey had already given him the opportunity, the capital of the kingdom. The clatter of horses' hooves. Sansui looked at him in surprise and said that the portcullises were so huge. The capital was truly amazing to him. He turned to the girl in his arms and asked if she thought the same. Brower looked at Sansui with a detached expression and asked Dewey if she didn't think that this savage was more interested in the bars than in the lady. With a desperate sigh, she said that everything was fine. It was just a peasant seeing the fortress walls for the first time. And what was behind them excited the hearts of ordinary people even more. Dewey said it had been a long time since she and Brower had been in the capital anyway. She hoped her brother and father were okay. They sent word of their arrival in the capital. Brower said he was sure they couldn't wait to meet Dewey. Brewer thought to himself that he had to be sure that trouble would come from them. Sansui thought to himself that this world of the Middle Ages was full of fantasy for him. After spending 500 years in another world, he felt like he was only now getting to the real deal. The carriages stopped at the Dewey mansion. The residents of this house were already waiting for them. Numerous servants approached the carriage with Dewey and greeted their mistress and Sansui. Dewey enthusiastically said that she had picked up this primate only recently and asked to take him and the child to their room. Sansui smiled awkwardly and stated that Dewey still continued to call him a primate. But she was a good person, if you didn't pay attention to her words. The girl in Sansui's arms suddenly began to cry. Sansui lifted her up and stood there in a stupor. One of the maids of Dewey's mansion took the baby girl from Sansui's hands and began to calm her down. He said that she was crying. Maybe she needed a diaper change. Sansui came to his senses and began to thank the maid for her actions. The butler came up to Dewey and Sansui and called her name. She looked up at the steps where her brother and father greeted her. She said that it had been a long time. Sansui himself did not notice how he approached Dewey and thought that at first glance, one could tell that the two of them were worthy noblemen. These two were not only tall, but also very well built. Dewey pulled Sansui out of his reverie and told her father and brother that she had picked up a wild monkey. He looked like he had some rare magic, so she was thinking of making him her bodyguard. Dewey's father looked at Sansui with fear and pulled out his sword. Following him, Dewey's brother pulled out his sword. Sansui was very surprised when he felt an aura of rage. Dewey and Brower, as well as the servants of the Dewey mansion, began to quietly leave Sansui. Dewey's brother said that to take a step towards his sister, yes, he seemed to be planning to lose his life. Dewey's father said that this dwarf wanted to protect his daughter. Sansui shouted for the two of them to give him a second to explain. Dewey's father and brother rushed at Sansui, shouting, not listening to his words. He asked them to calm down, but then resigned himself and stated that he would have to resort to his sword. Sansui parried the attacks of Dewey's father and brother with a sharp lunge, hitting his father on the chin and Dewey's brother on the head. Brower was very surprised, and Dewey smirked. Sansui turned around and asked for forgiveness for his actions and his impudence. He grimaced and thought that he had swung without thinking. But was everything okay? Dewey smiled to the side and thought that this was even much higher than her expectations from Sansui. Apparently, she was able to pick a very impressive person. Father Dewey shouted at Sansui who he was anyway, and how he ended up here. The girl in the maid's arms woke up from the shout and started crying. The maid immediately tried to calm her down. Dewey explained to her father how she found Sansui. Dewey's father said it was an interesting story, but he would love to hear Dewey explain why the spy would be living in their mansion. Dewey said she would certainly explain. Dewey's father turned to Sansui and said that she only stayed because he was with the child. There was a small group of people standing in the backyard of Dewey's mansion. Sansui stood in front of a fully armored youth. Father Dewey said that, as he had explained earlier, this one targeting his daughter would suddenly attack with full armament. Looking at Sansui, he told him to keep in mind that his weapon was not reliable. Dewey's father turned to Sansui and said that he understood how things were. He was not going to cancel his daughter's communication because he did not think that Sansui could not be a spy, because he was too visible. Dewey's father grinned sharply and said that, on the other hand, if Sansui wanted to take up a place in this house, they would have problems if he couldn't fight. Sansui stood there and thought that he had to give it his all. But suddenly he realized that these people had made up the exam as a cover to destroy him. The maid of Dewey's mansion ran up behind Sansui and asked what his daughter's name was. He remembered that he had never thought of a name for her. After thinking about it, he said that her name was Rain. The maid turned the girl toward Sansui and said that this was the last time they would see each other, so she had to say goodbye to her daddy. Sansui thought sullenly that even the maids knew that they wanted to kill him. Dewey's father said that Sansui would be destroyed in one blow. He needed to make sure it was painful. The boy said that any man who looked at his sister would never be able to repent for his sins for the rest of his life. Sansui was stunned to think that he was up against a super-protective father and a brother with a huge sister complex. Dewey's father shouted that there were no objections, so they would begin the duel. Dewey's father looked at Sansui and said that if he could destroy all of his son's defenses with just one blow of his wooden sword, he would allow Sansui and his child to stay. Dewey's father screamed at his son to destroy Sansui quickly. Dewey's brother screamed that anyone who came near his beloved sister would be destroyed. He screamed the spell Burning Soul. Sansui calmly exhaled and with a sharp jerk attacked Brother Dewey on the head with his Sword of Mental Balance power. Everyone watching the duel was seriously surprised. Sansui bashfully asked what Dewey's father said with one blow. Right. Dewey said disappointedly how Sansui fights boringly. Dewey's father, stunned by his son's defeat, reflected that, fully armed, he could have lost with one blow, and from a wooden sword at that. Dewey said it was very boring, but it looked like the sword was a part of him. Dewey's father thought that if this continued, he would have to accept Sansui as Dewey's bodyguard. Father Dewey suddenly pulled his sword out of its sheath and thought that he would not let this happen. He shouted at Sansui that he had opened himself up. But with a sharp blow, Sansui disabled Father Dewey, saying that his attack was too slow. Dewey's brother and father were lying on the ground, exhausted. She said that she couldn't look at them without sighing. She smirked and said that if there were no more objections, Sansui would be hired as her bodyguard. Her father tried to say something, but he couldn't get up. Sansui happily said thank you very much. Blower, who was standing behind him, thought that he looked completely normal. Suddenly, a maid came to Sansui and told Rain to look because her father was alive. Sansui took the girl in his arms and thought that now he had found a good place for Rain to grow up. And he also hoped that he had made the right choice. And Sansui confirmed to himself that he could find a job. He thought that whatever it was, he had a bad feeling about this. Lady Dewey was certainly no ordinary noblewoman to him. When he told her that hermits didn't burn, she had encased him in flames. When he said that hermits don't drown, she tried to drown Sansui. Dewey is a selfish woman who doesn't like it when things don't go her way. It's all because in her situation, she gets away with it. In the Arcana Kingdom, behind the royal family are 4 noble families, each with a designated territory they rule over. Dewey is from the Spade family. Add to that the fact that her father is the head of the family. Coupled with an overprotective brother, her narcissistic antics can't be stopped by anyone. Sansui stayed in this place only for Rain. The great Spade family took care of the daughter of an ignoramus like Sansui and raised her as a real lady. For someone like him, who only knows how to swing a sword, there's no better place to raise her. Dewey grew to love Rain very much. Brower, who was initially doubtful of Sansui, turned out to be a girl, and, as her appearance showed him, Brower had matured a lot. She is a very good swordsman, always giving her all. She's strict in her work, but also friendly and kind. Sansui recalled that there was one time when Dewey's brother returned with an army to take back his honor. He challenged Sansui to fight again, and so, for Sansui, 5 years passed. His daughter, Rain, grew up. Dewey and Brower grew older. A carriage pulled up to Dewey's mansion, and Sansui got out and started pulling out the luggage. Rain, Dewey, and Brower came out of the mansion to the carriage. Rain ran to hug Shinsui. Brower said that they had kept Sansui waiting, and if he had everything ready. He said yes. Dewey went to the carriage and shouted that she was tired of living with her parents, and it was finally time for her to go to the Royal Academy. The carriage was driving along the road to the Royal Academy. Dewey asked Brower how much longer it would take them to get to the academy. Brower replied that they would spend the night somewhere nearby, so they would arrive at the academy the following day. Dewey asked Sansui if there were any hooligans around here. He said there might be a den of bandits in the mountain nearby. Dewey smiled and said that it sounded very interesting. Brower replied that there was a threat of ambush, so Dewey should stay in the carriage. Dewey replied that there was no reason for her to listen to her advice. She left her father's house because she missed it every day, and now they were telling her to miss it again. There was no way she was going to do that. Brower and Sansui looked sad. Rain turned to Dewey and asked if they would be okay. Dewey said that they have nothing to worry about, because Sansui and Brower are very strong. She is right, isn't she? Sansui thought that her sudden demands were coming again. Even if she doesn't complain, Rain looks worried. But with him and Brower, there shouldn't be any problems here. But dealing with the ambush will be problematic. Even Brower frowned, but they still can't contradict Dewey. In the end, they rode for a long time, which got deep into the mountain. Rain looked out the window and was afraid of the darkness, running to Sansui. She said that she was scared. Sansui told Brower that they were already here. She asked how many there were. Sansui said 20. Dewey picked up Rain and told her that she was staying with her. Brower said that Sansui would stay with Dewey and Rain to protect them, and she would take care of the bandits. Sansui asked the driver to stop the carriage so they could get out for a while, and asked them to stay inside with the doors closed. Shadows in the bandits themselves began to appear opposite Brower and Sansui. They said that these guys could be a good catch. Sansui thought that their equipment was very worn out, and they looked very hungry. Brower said that it was impudent. How dare they go against Spade's shovel? The bandits responded rudely to Brower and rushed to attack. She said that the night Dewey Spade, Brower will be their enemy. She used the power sliding wind. The bandits were taken aback and realized that their enemy was a magician. One of the bandits shouted that he should not be allowed to use magic. Brower shouted that the only thing that awaits anyone who touches even a hair of the Spades is oblivion. Brower jumped up, preparing to attack. The bandits shouted that he was really flying. Even among mages, flying was an incredibly rare ability. Wasn't he a child? There was no way they could defeat such a powerful mage. Some bandits decided not to fight Brower, but to take Dewey and Rain hostage. Sansui gave his name and said that he was a swordsman who would fight them. The bandits shouted at him to get out of the way, or they would destroy him. Sansui used the Z-sword technique, knocking out one of the bandits. Jumping back into the darkness, Sansui attacked another bandit with the Z-release technique. Brower shouted that they were nothing against her wind. She came to the carriage with Sansui and said that they had dealt with all the bandits. Not a single one had escaped. Dewey, stroking Rain, said that Brower was as showy as always, and Sansui was as simple as always, although it was very dark and she couldn't see very well. Brewer said she was very sorry, and Sansui thought she was picky, as always. Dewey said that it was a huge disappointment for her, so Brower and Sansui should hurry up and get inside. Rain ran up to Dewey and hugged her. Dewey said that everything was fine now. Rain asked if it was true. Dewey replied that yes, those two had taken care of the bad guys. Sansui thought to himself that he really wished she would show a little kindness to them too. Royal Arcana Academy. The carriage carrying Dewey and her group stopped in front of a huge building. Dewey asked if this was the best academy in the country. Royal Arcana Academy. Sansui said it was bigger than he thought. Dewey asked Sansui what he thought about it. He replied that he felt a very strong magical aura. Dewey asked Rain what she thought about it. She replied that Dewey's house was much more impressive. For this, Dewey and Sansui called her a good girl and patted her on the head. A woman came out of the academy and said that for a daughter of one of the four great families, her academy looked boring. Dewey asked if it was the principal or the great sage. The woman replied that the principal would be enough. Dewey moved toward the principal and asked if she preferred it that she called her a mage. The woman replied that it was better to call her the principal. After all, the title of mage reminded her that she had lived quite a long life. Dewey bowed to the principal and asked if they were under her wing from now on, which sounded like great news. She asked that she and her servants be given guidance and support by the principal of the Royal Arcana Academy. The woman opened her mouth wide and laughed loudly. She said that Dewey really thought that her school could teach something to someone like her. After all, everything important had already been taught to her by the teachers of the great Spade family. Sansui thought that, of course, even though the two were talking out loud, it seemed like they were just enjoying themselves. They were probably getting along very well. The principal said that surely someone here was blessed, like Dewey. Everyone was beginning to get bored. Although she was already quite old and not young, there were so many interesting things left in this world that she wanted to see and understand. She looked toward Sansui and said that according to rumors, one of Dewey's guards practices the art of the sage, an ability so rare that she, a great mage and the headmaster of the Royal Academy, had never heard of it or seen it in action. The principal playfully said that she would like to ask Sansui to demonstrate her techniques to the Academy students. Dewey glanced sharply at Sansui and said that she was not sure about that. Sansui thought that this was a very problematic request for him. Even though he had trained for 500 years, he could still only use 4 sage techniques. One of them, Light Step, allows Sansui to reduce his weight and everything he touches. The second ability, Flash Step, allows him to cover long distances in just an instant. The third ability, Energy Sword, which fills his wooden sword with energy, making it very heavy and durable, like steel. The fourth and final ability, Energy Discharge, infuses things that Sansui touches or comes into contact with energy, and also allows him to hit or knock back his enemy. He admitted to himself that even after 500 years of training, he was only good at these 4 sage techniques. They were also commonplace for everyone and very ineffective. Dewey is well aware of this, and he hopes that she doesn't want him to show them his abilities and techniques. The director smiled sharply and chuckled. She said that Dewey knew that the heiress of the Batcherble family was bragging about the techniques of her guards and bodyguards. Dewey was taken aback by the words spoken by the director and asked again if she was talking about Heppen. Sharply turning her head towards the worried Sansui, she said that since this is the case, and the director wants to arrange an exhibition match, maybe she will agree. The principal happily said that she was very grateful to Dewey and thanked her. Sansui, completely upset, thought that he knew, because everything had to end like this. Royal Arcana Academy, Stadium. Large groups of people stood opposite each other. On one side stood Dewey's Spade, the heiress of the Spade family, Brower, one of her bodyguards and guards, and Sansui, a mysterious swordsman with the rarest technique, the sage art. On the other side stood Happy Batterbell, the heiress of the Batterbell family, a boy in a classic Japanese uniform, a short girl, and a woman with red hair. Sansui thought to himself that Heppen Batterbell was from a family as powerful as Dewey Spade, the heiress of the entire Batterbell family. She and Dewey are equal in status, but Happy Batterbell turned to Dewey and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Dewey made a terrible face and said that it was really so long since they had seen each other. Heppen was so inconspicuous that Dewey couldn't remember the last time they had met. Sansui thought that Dewey was too proud and always tried to be higher in status than her peers. In any case, the 2 girls who stood in front of Sansui seemed to be using some rare ability. The woman with red hair turned to Heppen and said she could do whatever she wanted. The woman said she was going to wait her turn. The little short girl said she was going to wait her turn too. Sansui looked after the girls as they left and thought that they were not in the mood to fight, but he was much more worried about this Japanese. He was definitely wearing imitation leather boots and a synthetic blazer. Plus, he wasn't interacting with the Badgerable heiress in the way one would interact with one of the 4 families. The Japanese man turned to the heiress of Badgerable and said that Heppen should not get involved in the squabbles here. Sansui stated that he was definitely Japanese, but even after all of that, he didn't just have a rare ability. He had a trick that allowed him to reflect any type of magic. Everyone moved to the stadium, which was completely filled with people. In the center of it stood a short girl and a woman with red hair. From everywhere, quiet whispers were heard, discussing them. Sansui turned around in shock, not understanding how so many people could fit there. The director began to give her speech. Today, to everyone present, 4 people who practice rare abilities will show their best skills. The principal shouted that the first to come out was the princess of the distant kingdom of Majan, Miss Suni Majan. Suni shouted the words of her technique, while the royal power is contained within my body. From the age of myths, grant me the power of the founding king, capable of turning me into a powerful beast, great lion, protector of the royal family. Take my body and adorn this land with your greatness. Suni appeared before everyone in the form of a huge lion, which occupied most of the arena. It was the technique Divine Possession. She asked everyone how they liked her technique. It was a secret ability of her family, which was passed down through generations. The principal of the Royal Arcana Academy was shocked by Sunya's technique. The spectators who were sitting in the stands began to talk excitedly. This was the first time they had seen this magic, and it was so frightening that some jumped in fear. The director snapped out of her stupor and shouted that it was beautiful magic. She never thought she would have the chance to see such rare magic from a distant land. It was great. Suni stood proudly in front of the audience and grinned. The director moved on to introduce the next magician. She said that the next girl uses cursed magic. Usually people don't even notice her, but still, everyone should watch her movements very carefully. The little girl said thank you to the principal. She introduced herself as Juga Seb. Once she activates her cursed magic, she is allowed to generate curse power. With this power, she is able to change many things. She raised her staff high and pointed it straight at the sword that stood in front of the headmaster's desk. The strange black swirls of energy caused the sword to bend and fall. The audience burst into applause for Tsuga and began to say that this is the power of the Sebe family. It is passed down from their ancestors. The director approached the broken sword and took it in her hands, surprised, and said that it was wonderful. The principal thanked Suni and Shugo for their kindness and showing off their skills. Shugo replied that of course it wasn't that hard. Suni folded her hands on her hips and said it wasn't that impressive. She stood up in her place and shouted that the ones who had been waiting for a long time were next. The strongest swordsman in the kingdom and a future head of the betrayal house would enter the arena. Sansui stood in front of Seg. The crowd screamed in anticipation. Dewey proudly told the boy that his victory was obvious, but still, he should go and show them the difference in their statuses. Hebben shouted at Seiji to win and take the title of strongest from the Spade family. He must win. The boys looked awkwardly at the girls who were competing with each other. Dwayne sat down on the couch next to Rain and looked at the opponents with a wide smile. Hebben stood next to her friends and looked at the battlefield with a tense expression. The director smiled broadly and said loudly that the guard accompanying the Spade family heiress's convoy was Shirokuro Sansui, also known as the child-faced holy sword. The woman added that he was the strongest swordsman in the Arcana Kingdom. The boy felt awkward from such words. He thought that he hadn't told anyone about his age, but it hadn't changed lately, so it was clear where everyone got that child's face. The guy went on to say that, after 500 years, he still has the face of a child, so he thinks the nickname is quite appropriate. In any case, he stands behind the master. Sansui added that the title of Holy Sword also somehow embarrasses him. The director continued to say with a smile that Sansui uses a rare ability. The woman said that even she had never seen it, and it was called the Art of the Sage. People began to whisper about the boy's ability. She said that today, at the request of Miss Dewey Spade, the performance would be a special exhibition match. Eppen clicked her tongue angrily when she heard this information. Director looked at the other guy and said loudly that they had Mizu Sega on this side. The woman continued to say that he was engaged to Happy Batcherball and would become the next head of the Batcherball family. Sansui wondered if he was nostalgic to see a living trope. The director added that the previous members, Miss Suni Majan and Miss Tsuga Sabe, were also engaged to him. The woman happily asked if youth was not beautiful. Sansui thought in shock that there was also a harem trope. The principal said that Sir Sega uses support magic. She wants to emphasize to the students that this is the first time for them to see a great defender in a real battle. The woman added that she asked them to watch carefully. Sansui thought that support magic was the ability of a healer and a defense. He could heal people's wounds. The guy continued to talk about how he could also create walls and armor from magic. Seiga shouted loudly that he was using bright armor. The guy got armor. Seiji shouted to his opponent that he was waiting for him to be ready. Sansui pulled out his sword and replied that he was ready. Seiji could start at any time. He would take the blow. Sansui looked at his opponent and thought that he could only sense one type of energy so far. If he couldn't sense the others, he thought he would use one ability. The boy continued to reason that, judging from the explanation, it was a secret that he could use other magic besides support. It was fine if he wanted to fight like a normal defender. Sansui looked at Seiga's fighting stance and thought that his sword. Judging from his stance, he is an amateur who does not know how to hold a sword well, and the armor he created does not look that strong. Everyone began to tensely wait for the battle to begin. Sansui thought that he would use Quick Step to instantly get close, and then Energy Sword to strike his armor. This should knock him out. Sansui looked at Seiji and thought in surprise that he felt a different type of energy now, and his expression also changed. Did he read his thoughts or predict the future? Could that be possible? Sansui decided that it didn't matter anyway. Neither option would affect the outcome. The boy used a quick step and hit Seiji, who parried the blow with his sword. Sansui used Energy Discharge. It touched the armor and there was a bright flash. Seiji flew into the wall and his defense fell, leaving him in normal clothes. He rolled to the ground unconscious. Heppen covered her mouth with her hand in horror to keep from screaming. Sansui smiled widely and said that he hoped that was all. The director asked in shock that the match was already over. People started whispering. They asked each other that they could see anything. Maybe he used a teleporter. No one could say exactly what had just happened. Sansui approached the girls who were completely confident in him. Rain ran towards him with a joyful cry. Dewey said disappointedly that it was always so easy, even though she understood how cool he was. Sansui awkwardly said that he apologized to her for that. Sansui picked up the girl, who hugged him tightly. Rain happily shouted that her dad was so cool. Brower told the boy that it was great, as always. She asked him why he couldn't strike before he put up a defense. Sansui replied that he somehow knew about his attack and prepared to repel it. The boy added that that was why he changed his strike. Brower asked in surprise that Seiji had predicted his strike. Sansui replied that he was probably hiding some ability. The guy thought that Seiji's training was weak. He had a lot of opportunities from God. The girls ran up to Seiji, who were anxiously shouting for him to wake up. Suni asked that he woke up. Suga said in shock that she was stunned now. The director approached the boy and shouted to take him to the medic. People were whispering that Seiji was knocked out so quickly, so that's how strong Dewey's security is. The girl happily said that she had just been enrolled and had already seen something amazing. She added that she was so glad she had come to the academy. Seiji regained consciousness in the infirmary. The boy tried to understand what was happening for a few seconds. He covered his eyes with his hand and said in disappointment that he had lost like that. How humiliating. Heaven angrily screamed with tears in her eyes that the guard had deceived this girl. Suni told her that he had not. This swordsman saw Seiga's movement and then changed his attack. He is very pumped up. The girl screamed that Seiga did not use his full power. She added that if he had given it his all, he would have won. Suga said that there would have been big problems if Sir Seiga's secret had been revealed. The girl sadly added that she was sure she could handle it. Heppen angrily screamed that she didn't want to see Seiga get hurt anymore. Seiji said that she apologized to Tsugi for making her worry, but he really wanted to defeat Sansui. Even if he did, he would have to reveal his secret and use magic. The inhabitants of this city, with the rarest of exceptions, can only use one ability. They are born with this ability, and no matter how hard you try, it does not matter. They who possess magic. They can control the magic of the elements, fire, water, wind, and earth. Those who possess a wise heart can control space, gravity, and life forces. The art of the sage. Those with the royal heart can turn into beasts. Divine mastery. Those with the cursed magic can change the essence of an object. Cursed magic. Those who possess holy magic can create armor and barriers, heal wounds, holy magic. Each of these abilities can be used in different ways, but it does not matter what type of magic they have. unless, of course, they are the most exceptional of geniuses. Elemental magic or some other rare magic taught by someone else cannot be used. They can discuss Saiga now. Just like Sansui, he was an ordinary Japanese schoolboy mistakenly killed by God. It's still the same situation where God kills a Japanese by mistake, then apologizes, grants special abilities, and sends him to the same world as Sansui. Saiga, who uses holy magic, had more than one. Elemental magic, royal heart, cursed magic, wise heart. He had all of these magic. This is his blessing. Currently, Saiga can use 4 different types of abilities, such as fire magic, holy armor magic, divine possession, and also lost magic that was only mentioned in records, bending time to see the future, divination magic. With training, he could also achieve the art of the sage. His stats are off the charts. Such capabilities should be called cheat. Fearing the possibility of attracting too much unwanted attention, he decided to pretend to be able to use only one ability in public. However, to master them all, he needs to train hard for many years. Sansui and Seiji had another fight, which Sansui won. Heben screamed in horror that he was instantly defeated again, even with all his abilities. Soon he asked in surprise that Sansui was still fighting at full speed. Sugi sighed in disappointment and covered her eyes with her hands. Sansui thought uncomfortably that Seiji had so much confidence in his cheat. The guy continued to reason that Seiji challenged him to a duel the very next day after his defeat. Seiji overestimated his defense and speed, so he just stupidly charged at him with his sword over his head. Shounsui calculated everything and aimed for his torso. His speed helped him break the armor. In the end, he just crashed into his armor and passed out. Dewey looked at Seiji and said that he started using abilities other than holy magic. He had some expectations, but it was a disgrace. She added that it was a waste of time. Dewey asked his friends if they could return to the academy. Brower replied that they could. Seiga's friends looked at the girl angrily. Dewey told Sansui that even if his opponent was weak, his neglect of his task of entertaining her meant that he was a failure as a guard. Seiji awkwardly replied that he begged his mistress's forgiveness. Dewey said it was incredible. She kept wondering what Rain's mother saw in him. He reminded her that he hadn't changed at all since they met. Brower asked the boy that he was a few years older. Sunsi looked away and mumbled awkwardly. The girl stared at him, waiting for an answer. The guy thought that a few years was putting it mildly. Dewey said that he and Rain were not related by blood. She asked the guy if there was a woman he was interested in. Sansui awkwardly replied that no. Actually, the guy didn't know what to answer. Sansui thought that he couldn't say that he was a sage and 500 years old. Dewey said he was a man with a permanent poker face. He probably wanted a sensual, extravagant relationship. Sansui asked in surprise what kind of sensual relationship. The boy said that during his apprenticeship with the master, he had learned to avoid such impulses as lust. Brower blushed and replied that that was why. Dewey and Sansui stared at her in surprise. Brower awkwardly said that for Sansui, who had no interest in romance, this was a bit problematic. Dewey looked at her friend with admiration. Sansui looked at Breyer in surprise. Seiji came to his senses. Heppen helped him sit up. He looked angrily at Sansui, who had defeated him again in front of everyone. It had been a month since Mrs. Dewey arrived at the academy. The principal was teaching a lesson to her students. She told her students that they knew that by using holy magic, they could create armor to protect their body. Everyone listened to her attentively. Sansui stood behind Dewey with Brower. He thought that at first, even though he did not dare to say a word, he thought that she would be tired. But to his surprise, she diligently attends the headmistress's lessons. The director continued to say that one day, a certain researcher decided to create armor to protect his body. However, he was a fire mage, so the armor turned out to be fiery. This man was very furious. Sansui thought that the headmistress was giving a lecture on failures in the vastness of magical research. The guy thought that it would be educational for her, but the woman awkwardly said that the only thing he achieved was burning alive. Dewey covered her mouth to stifle her laughter. He thought the lectures had only made Dewey laugh, which was uncalled for. The principal had said that the lesson they should learn from this failure was simple. They should never try magic on themselves. Sansui looked at Brewer, who was watching him attentively, and when he caught her gaze, the girl immediately turned away. The guy thought that something else had changed in his personal life. He had known Brower since she was a child, and he was surprised that that period had already arrived. Little Rain was making friends in kindergarten. Sansui continued to reason that it was clear that he was the reason for Brower to develop an interest in romance. But the lady in Rain began to tease her about it. Sansui added that he would say it was a very awkward situation. They returned to Dewey's other mansion, which is located near the academy where she studies. Sansui stood in front of Brewer. The girl blushed and awkwardly said that she was sorry. Lately, she had been devoting too little time to her duties. Sansui told her not to worry about it. Dewey and Rain were watching them. Brower worriedly asked the boy if it wasn't hard for him to cope with everything. The girl said that she knew it was strange for her to say that, but she was paying too much attention to him. Sansui thought that if this had happened before he became a sage, he would have been in seventh heaven. Brower said that if anything happened, she would count on him to handle it. Sansui replied that it was okay. She could rely on him. She asked him what he meant by that he would protect her. He replied positively. The boy heard a noise and looked out the window. Brower asked worriedly what happened. Sansui answered in horror that the current and previous heads were coming here right now. The knights on horseback were approaching the mansion. The boy and the girls went out onto the balcony. Brower said that Sansui was right. This was the cavalry unit of the heads. She went on to say that this gear wasn't for simple travel between residences. Dewey said she wondered if they'd read the letter she'd sent the other day. What a bad time. Brower and Sansui thought at the same time what kind of nonsense she wrote in that letter. One of the men screamed loudly for them to die. Rain told her dad that she was scared. Dewey hugged Rain and said with a smile that they had a scared child here. Why didn't Sansui calm these two down? Sansui said in surprise that he understood. Sansui told Brower that if the lady was attacked, he asked her to take care of her. Sansui attacked Brother Dewey, who was in the front ranks. He hit him on the head, and he fell unconscious. The other knight stopped and stared at the boy in surprise. Someone said in horror that there was a holy sword in front of them. The head of the family appeared and angrily shouted that he had no right to approach his daughter. Sansui thought tiredly that the leader was as energetic as usual. The boy appeared in front of the man and hit him on the head with his wooden sword. The leader lost consciousness. Sansui stopped his horse. A knight approached him and said that he apologized for disturbing him about this. Sansui awkwardly said that everything was fine. The boy thought that they were mad because of the lady anyway. Actually, they should apologize. The knight told Sansui that they would continue their way to the lady's mansion. The boy said that he asked them not to hurry. At this time, Seiji, Heppen, Suni, and Tugi were riding in the carriage. The boy's sword spoke. It said that his master should not worry as long as he, the divine sword, was by his side. Seiji happily said that yes, he was right. He would fight alongside XX. Sansui and Brewer bowed awkwardly to the knight who had suffered inconvenience because of the chapter. The knight bowed to them to show that everything was fine and it was not their fault. Sansui watched awkwardly as the knights rode away. The knight bowed to the boy again. Sansui and Brower watched as they rode away in the direction of Dewey's mansion. Everyone was gathered in the mansion. Dewey was sitting with Rain opposite her father and brother. Sansui and Brower were standing behind Dewey. There were cups of tea on the table. The man told his sister that they had plenty of enemies. The man looked at his sister carefully. He wanted her to understand the seriousness of their situation. He brought the cup to his lips and said that if they were not able to protect his little sister, then it was hard to call them her protector. The head of the family said tensely that they had passed this unannounced exam with excellent results. Sansui thought that they seemed to be remorseful, but he wished they were more ashamed. Sansui continued to reason that all the knights had left immediately. They had been sent here for practically no reason. Sansui could still see the knights bowing to him before his eyes. The head of the family put the letter on the table with a loud ulura. His face betrayed all the horror of what was written there. Everyone thought that something terrible had happened, but only Dewey knew about her trick. The man said angrily that Dewey had written in her letter that she and Sansui had married only in words and that Brower would give birth to her together. Dewey covered her mouth with her hand to keep from laughing at her own prank. That was the gist of the letter. Brewer blushed and screamed in surprise. She knew about her mistress's morals, but such attacks always embarrassed her. She really liked Sansui. The girls were very awkward. The head of the family coughed and asked if it was too early for this. Brother Dewey confidently said that everything was as father said. Brower blushed, and Sansui tiredly looked at the head of the family. Rain looked at her dad in surprise. Dewey pretended that she knew nothing and did nothing. Brother Dewey said that if they were talking about a marriage between Brower and Sansui, then he could arrange for Sansui to get a suitable position so that he could marry the daughter of a nobleman. Brower, the head of the family, said that, however, he could not approve of the marriage between Sansui and his daughter. Of all her whims, he refused to consider only this one. Dewey asked that, in that case, she could marry anyone she chose. The head of the family said that they had another matter that had been raised in the letter. Sansui felt uneasy that this was a strong change of subject. The chief asked if the girl's fiancé, Botarable, was true, that he was capable of using any magic. Dewey replied that they knew he was at least capable of using holy magic, elemental magic, and divine spell mastery. The head of the family said thoughtfully that if this was true, then he had no choice but to consider him a threat. Brother Dewey said that he now sees why House Betrebel decided to take him in. He added that, however, it seems that Saiga is no match for Sansui. Dewey replied with a wide smile that it was true. There was no way his protector would lose to some lucky betrothed. Her brother replied that Sansui truly lives up to the nickname of face-to-face child with the holy sword as the strongest swordsman. His strength elevates their status as well. Sansui said that compared to Master Suiboku, he could be considered an amateur. Everyone became silent after Sansui's words. Brother Dewey awkwardly said that he thought that every time he spoke about it, he thought that it was so, but the head of the family interrupted his son and said that even the imperial guards were unable to touch him. If this Suiboku, according to rumors, was even stronger than him, who was he then? Dewey's brother awkwardly replied that he knew he needed a teacher, but frankly, he couldn't even imagine one. Dewey thought about what her brother and father had said. The girl said that while she could understand what she was waiting for when she learned his appearance, what was more unimaginable to her was that there was such a big gap in strength. Sansui thought that Master Suiboku could be called a god, being the strongest after all. The leader asked if this Saiga really had the heart of a sage. Was it possible that he could have been trained by the same man? To which Sansui replied negatively and asked not to worry about it. Just the basic knowledge took him 500 years to learn. It also seems that Seiji can't copy skills just by seeing them. Dewey exhaled and asked if maybe they could stop talking about the lucky man. They could go back to discussing the marriage between Sansui and Brower. Brewer blushed at the young lady's words. The head of the family replied that yes, she was right. Sansui felt something. He wondered in surprise what kind of aura he was feeling now. It was not human. Everyone went outside and saw Heppen, Saigi, Suni, and Suga standing in front of the mansion. Heppen bowed and said that she was greeting the current head and the former head. The girl looked at Dewey angrily and said that she also greeted her. Dewey sighed tiredly. She made a sad face and asked if she was interested in another rematch. Dewey continued to say that she wasn't interested in their little group. She was interested in more important things. Happen angrily replied that Dewey was saying that because he was afraid of losing. Happen asked Dewey heard her words. The girl looked at her friend and shouted loudly that Seiga was recognized as the owner of the divine sword. Seiji smiled widely and proudly. The head of the family said in surprise that this meant that he had one of the 8 divine treasures of this world in his hands. The sword answered that it was true. The weapon glowed and was torn from the hands of the owner. Everyone stared at the sword in shock. The sword turned into a little girl who looked proudly at her new acquaintances. The girl said loudly that she was a divine sword named XX. Dewey screamed in surprise that this sword had turned into a little girl. XX said that she was created by the gods as the strongest weapon. Sansui was surprised to think that she was created by God, the same God who sent him here. Saiji trembled and said that in order to defeat Sansui, XX would recognize him. He had worked himself to death for the past month. Sichi shouted loudly that he would win this time. Sansui thought in shock that he was actually bragging about how hard he'd worked for a month. Brower thought it was interesting how a month of training could make a difference. At the Botcherable estate, Heppen, Seiji, Suni, and Suga stood before their father. They were in the office of the head of the Botcherable family. The girl awkwardly told her father that she was asking for forgiveness. She was so disappointed that she revealed Seiji's secret to Dewey. The man looked at his daughter who awkwardly lowered her eyes and tried not to meet his. Her father replied that even Seiji couldn't scratch the saint with his sword. He laughed sadly. Seiji replied that he used all his strength, but the boy fell silent, and Hepping took his hand to support him. The boy did not look at the girl who was so worried about him. Father Heppin exhaled and said that Saigi was too greedy. The man took the keys out of his sleeve. He walked over the bookshelf. He said that if Saigi continued like this, his rare talent would simply disappear. The man opened the small chest and said that since Seiga's current goal was to become stronger, perhaps he could pull out the sword and realize his dream. The man handed the boy a piece of paper. Heaven asked what the map was. Seiji asked his father with interest what the map was. Suni and Shuga looked at the piece of paper with interest. On the map at the very end of the forest was a red cross, which marked the location of the magic sword. Seiji really wanted it. Father, Heppen replied that this map showed the location of the most powerful magic sword, Eskex. Juga asked in surprise that this was the same sword from the legends. Sun asked in shock that it was in this country. Heppen screamed that it was created before the kingdom of Arkaha was founded. Using the power of a swordsman, one can destroy an entire country. The strongest sword. Seiji looked at the map and said that if he had such a sword, then he would. He was already imagining how he would defeat Sansui with his magic sword. The friends walked through the forest until they reached a cave. It looked ominous and seemed to say that it was very dangerous and it was better for no one to enter. Seiji said that they were there. They walked in the darkness until they saw the sword that was embedded in the stone shining brightly. Seiji excitedly said that it was the magic sword they were looking for. The sword said that there was another who wanted to master it. It must go. There was no one who could defeat it. Seiji shouted furiously that there was someone he wanted to defeat, no matter what. XX replied that every person had a similar wish. However, they were all weaklings compared to the swordsman who sealed Ymir. Seiji excitedly shouted that he was no ordinary person. Seiji summoned his armor and shouted that he had received power from God himself. XX responded in surprise that he was telling the truth. He did not look like a peasant. He asked for permission to judge Seiji's passion and drive. They went outside, and the sword watched from the cave. Seiji hit the stone with all his might, which broke into 2 pieces. The girl screamed with delight. Seiji smiled happily. Seiji and XX stood in front of Sansui. Seiji and his new friend smiled confidently. Brother Dewey stood between them and said that they were both ready. Then they would begin soon. Sansui thought in surprise that Seiji had not drawn his sword. In any case, he would use all his strength to his full potential. Seiji shouted to SX to be ready. Brother shouted loudly that they had started. XX caught fire and began to turn into a sword. Seiji thought that XX was a magic sword. Its ability was to strengthen magical powers. Seiji shouted that he was summoning the grandiose shining armor, as well as the maximum flame. God's destroyer, the wolf of disaster. He must heed his call and destroy the enemies, the divine domain. Seiji became a wolf in armor, holding a fiery sword. A high wind arose. Sansui thought that with these spells, Seiji's offensive power, defensive and physical abilities, all increased greatly. Sansui continued to reason that his spell prediction had also improved. He could now see a few seconds ahead. Seiji loudly said that he was going to attack. Seiji raised his sword above his head and shouted furiously that he was summoning the Inferno Blade that cuts through rocks. The girls looked at their friend with all their faith. Sansui watched the boy run towards him. He thought that, whatever it was, seeing a few seconds into the future meant that he was only trying to cope with the things that would happen in those seconds. Sansui used the light step. He appeared behind his opponent and turned him over. Seiji fell, and Sansui took his sword. The guy returned to his human form. Seiji looked at the enemy who had defeated him again in surprise. Sansui thought that the reason Seiji lost was due to his lack of preparation and the simple fact that this opponent was in his worst match. Sansui pointed his sword at Seiga, who was lying on the ground in his armor. He couldn't believe that he had lost. Seiga was defeated, as Sansui predicted the outcome of this battle between the boys. Seiga raised his head and looked at his opponent carefully. Sansui thought that prediction was a skill that allowed him to see the future, but only in his field of vision. Thanks to this, he was able to see Saiga's future actions. For divination, special books are used that help in divination. XX thought that after he lost sight of Sansui, and Saiga's gaze was directed to the sky, and thus, everything ended. The sword burst into flames and turned back into the girl. She continued to burn for a few seconds but then cooled down. Dewey asked, upset, that it was over already. She had expected a more interesting battle, but it was over too quickly again. Hepin angrily screamed that this simply couldn't be happening. Sugo worriedly asked how Saiga was. The girls couldn't believe that their friend had lost after all. They had been looking for the magic sword together with him. Hepin asked how he could defeat Saiga-sama so quickly. Suni clenched her fists and said that they had to admit that he was far superior to Saiga. Hepin sadly said that Saiga had worked so hard to defeat Sansui. Sansui's light step spell can affect not only him, but also everything he touches. At that moment, Sansui reduced Saiga's weight, so he turned him back and knocked him to the ground. The guy did not have time to do anything from shock. This is what Sansui just did. The head of the family said in shock that Sansui defeated the owner of enormous power with one action. He can't believe it. Brower couldn't believe that Sansui defeated such a strong opponent in just a few seconds. Sansui bowed to Hepin, Sugi, and Suni, who looked at him in surprise. They were trying to recover from the shock of what they had seen. The girls couldn't even move to help Sigi. Saiji continued to lie on the grass. He said that he always thought that Sansui was hiding his power, but now he thinks that he is more powerful than he thought. XX looked at Sansui carefully. She thought that Saiga, however, was still confused, but there was someone who could remember. To perform these amazing movements, only one person could do it. The girl thought that Soboki was walking with him. She hadn't seen him for a long time, but all of Sansui's movements were imbued with memories of her master. The girl screamed loudly for Sansui to stop and not go anywhere. XX asked furiously that he is Soboki's disciple, isn't he? She asks him to answer. Sansui looked at her in surprise. Dewey's father and Brower thought at the same time that the boy seemed a little surprised. Dewey's brother tried to understand what was going on. Sansui asked XX how she knew him. X cried and screamed that he left her alone to take the place of God. Through Sansui's movements, she knows that he is his disciple. The girl began to wipe away her tears and sob. Sansui was surprised to think that he wanted to take the place of God. Could it be that he really was God? His master said dejectedly that he wanted to become the strongest. What a fool! What was Sansui thinking about? Sansui thought in surprise that now it was clear why he knew God. The guy was thinking about something, and the others were watching him closely to understand what he was talking about with XX. CG sat down next to XX, who continued to cry. He said that the head of the family said that her previous master lived long before the kingdom was founded. Dewey asked with interest that her previous owner was Sansui's teacher, but the girl looked at her brother to continue her thought and tell everyone. The boy said that according to the long history of the Arcana Kingdom, it was impossible for a human to live that long. Brower added that it was no more likely that Master Sansui was one of his descendants. X screamed loudly that this was impossible, since Suiboki was a hermit. Simply could not die. It was simply impossible. He had left her. Subagu took her in the form of a sword to a cave and left her in a stone for many years. Before that, he said that he apologized for this, but he wanted to be the strongest and independent of anything. She watched him leave. She wanted to scream that no. He waited for her and didn't leave. She was asking him to do so. Suiboku left anyway, to become the strongest. X continued to cry loudly and call Suiboki. Hebin, Tugi, and Sunyi listened to the girl's story in shock. CG wanted to calm her down, but he didn't know what to say. She screamed loudly that the hermit could live for 1,000 years. He could not die. Dewey, her brother and father, Brow. Rain remembered that Sansui had not changed since their first meeting. Iskax shouted loudly at Sansui to answer her. He was Suiboku's young disciple. Sansui replied that it was okay. He had never heard of her before, but his master might be the person she was talking about. Dewey listened attentively to their conversation. She sternly told the guy to answer her honestly. The guy looked at her and awkwardly said that it was good. Dewey looked him in the eye and asked how old he was. Sansui said tiredly that unfortunately he couldn't remember exactly, too much time had passed. Sansui added that he had been training for 500 years straight, thanks to his master. Everyone looked at him in shock. Sigu said in surprise that he had been training for 500 years. After the others find out that Sansui is actually about 500 years old, they are shocked. After the conversation outside, everyone present moves to the hall in the mansion. One girl says that the guy's story sounds implausible. It is clear from her that the girl finds it hard to believe that Sanusi had such incredible information from them for so many years. It is clear from her that Dewey is in such shock that she does not even know what emotion she should be experiencing. Brother Dewey, who is still reeling from the news he recently heard, suggests that the others stop pressuring Sansui, since the guy apparently had such serious information and did not deceive family members on purpose. Dewey's father also decides to speak out about what happened, and says that the girl's brother lived with the hero for 5 years, so the Spade family can believe that their daughter and sister's bodyguard is not lying about his story. The girl's father also adds that what happened to them was too unexpected, so that this story and its truthfulness were hard to believe for absolutely everyone who heard it. The man folds his hands into a lock. The head of the Spade family says that it is time for Sansui to explain the whole truth to the people with whom he lives. Bauer, in turn, says that no one demands that the hero prove his story, and adds that they will simply believe his words. Rain, sitting in the living room with the others, says nothing and only looks at her father, not fully understanding what is happening. The girl only sees that everyone present in the room is not in the best mood. Sansui says that he understands everything. It is noticeable that the hero is serious. He understands that there is no point in hiding the truth anymore, so he is going to tell the whole truth to the Spade family, whom he served for several years. The hero talks about how he was born in a completely different world. His life was radically different from the one he lives now. While Sansui talks about his life in the past world, he remembers what his short life there was like. He also does not forget to mention the god who later created X and the meeting with him. He says that in the past world he died by mistake. The hero does not say for what reason his life was cut short. After this, Sansui tells how he became a disciple of Master Suiboki by the command of God. While the hero tells all this, he remembers what happened in the most vivid colors. Sansui also decides to tell about how he was practiced by the owner for 500 years. In addition, the hero allows to tell about an equally important event in his life. Sansui remembers and talks about how he met Rain in the forest when she was still a very small child, and, finding no other way out, decided to take her and raise her as his own daughter. Upon hearing this story, Rain does not immediately accept it. It is noticeable that the girl is not very happy with this truth. Sitting on a chair with everyone else in the room, she visibly tenses up and clenches her fists, probably upset by what she just heard. Dewey's older brother says that even though he understands everything, he still believes everything that Sansui said. Dewey's older brother also thanks the hero for telling the story, despite its ambiguous content. However, the girl's father turns to Sansui and says that he believes the boy. He also adds that he believes the young man not because of his words, but because the hero showed his strength and intentions. In addition, the head of the Spade family also notices that Sansui is truly worthy of the name child-faced swordsman Saint, and tells the hero so. Neither Dewey nor Brow say anything to the hero. It is noticeable that while Dewey looks disapprovingly at Sansui, her subordinate does not know at all what to think about this. Suddenly, Dewey turns to the hero and asks him incredulously if the guy is hiding something else from the family. Sansui, in turn, confidently says that he told them everything that he knew firsthand. Dewey asks if it is true that he trained by simply swinging a sword or that he is only capable of using 4 skills. The guy replies that it is true. Indignantly asks how Sansui could only swing a sword for some time and only learn 4 skills in all that time. The girl says that it sounds too absurd to be true. Sansui, in turn, desperately says that he swears that everything he said is true. The guy adds that, for all 500 years, he simply swung his sword and learned only 4 skills that the girl knows. Dewey wearily puts his hand to his head and says that he does not understand the sages at all. Her father agrees with his daughter and says that now he understands why Saiga did not succeed. Suddenly, Dewey's older brother says that the sages and their art are not something that ordinary people can imitate. Suddenly, Rain decides to intervene in the discussion of Sansui's life and the conversation, having thought about this decision for a while. The girl turns to her father and says that she wants to ask him about something. Sansui looks at his daughter in surprise and asks what she would like to know from him, thereby showing that he is now ready to answer any questions his daughter may have. Without a second's hesitation, She asks the hero why he called her by that name. The hero, hearing this question, does not answer right away. It is noticeable that Sansui is not so much confused as he does not know how best to convey the truth to his daughter. He probably understands that the answer he gives her will not really satisfy the girl. Finally, having thought over his answer, the guy says that when he was asked what the name of the girl he was holding was, he came up with the name Rain on the spot. Hearing such an unpleasant answer, the girl instantly becomes furious. She turns to her father and indignantly but frivolously shouts that she hates him. At this time, a small gathering is also taking place at the Bartable estate, organized in the living room. In the room are Happen, Suni, Saiga, Tsuga, XX, and the oldest member of the Bartable house. The man, sitting alone on the sofa near the door, sighs heavily and says that since 500 years have passed, it is not at all surprising that the guy with whom Saiga entered into battle is so strong. A young guy, also a sword, sitting on a chair near the coffee table, XX, says that he does not know the details of everything that happened to Sansui, but the guy is quite young for a sage. He also adds that his main weapon is a sword, so he still has many more of the sage's arts to learn. The girl sitting on the other sofa says that calling a man who is 500 years old young is strange. Another girl, Happen, also adds that in the kingdom of Medan there are legends about sages. She looks very thoughtful. Sunimajan, also in the living room, says she has heard that sages can do things like lift mountains into the air and control clouds. She says she has always read stories about this. XX also adds that everything Suni said is true. The girl also says that Suiboki was once able to send an entire mountain into the clouds. It is noticeable from the girl's face that she really believes it. To Seiji's surprise, XX also reveals that the sage can actually control the weather as he wishes. It is noticeable that Seigi is clearly uncomfortable upon hearing this information. He says that Sansui trained for 500 years under the guidance of an amazing sage, while the boy himself boasted of only a measly month of training. Happen, in turn, decides not to respond to Seiga's words in any way, but only says that the only question that interests her in this whole story is why the sage decided to become Dewey Spade's bodyguard. No one in the room dares to answer this question, because no one can even imagine what the answer to such a question might sound like. The silence lasts for a couple of seconds. X is the first to decide to break the silence. He addresses everyone present in the room and asks what they should all do now. He turns to the sword's owner, Saiga, and asks if the boy will really continue to fight and compete with Suiboki's student. The tone in which he asks this question is very serious. Finally, Saiga decides to say something. He opens his mouth to finally answer X's question, but before he can utter a word, he is interrupted by someone else sitting in the living room. The person who decides to interrupt Saiga turns out to be Tushiga. She turns to Saiga and desperately shouts that he should not continue his competition with Sanusai under any circumstances. Hearing such a loud statement, all the people sitting in the living room turn to the girl. From their puzzled and even slightly frightened faces, it is noticeable that none of them really expected such words to be voiced. The girl menacingly moves away from her place next to the window and heads straight towards Saiga. After which, finally approaching the guy close enough, she places her small palm on his hands. She raises her voice once more and asks the hero not to fight Sansui under any circumstances. One could say that the girl is begging Saiga to stop what she considers to be a useless competition. Tsugi's voice becomes quieter, and she admits that she does not want to see Saiga suffer from the injuries he receives during his battles with Sanusi under any circumstances. The girl desperately states that Saiga has already fought Sanusi 3 times and asks why that is not enough for the boy. As she says this, she remembers all 3 times the boy lost battles and got injured. Tsuga says that she will never understand the reason why Saiga continues this competition. She asks why the guy needs it. Heppen, in turn, thinks to himself that Tsuga told him what they were all thinking. Saiga really doesn't understand the girl's reaction. He tries to object, but doesn't have time. Someone in the room also starts talking at the same time as him, and the guy decides to shut up, out to be XX. He suggests that perhaps Saiga simply does not want to listen to other people's thoughts about a possible retreat. He asks those sitting in the living room not to be fools in proposing such ideas. X goes on to say that in order for a master to defeat Sansui, in addition to the art of the sages, he must learn other rare magics, as well as spend many decades immersed in training. Saiga notes that this is not much. Tsuga, in turn, continues to stand his ground. The girl asks the guy to promise her that he will no longer fight with Sansui. Saiga, looking closely at the girl and feeling obvious awkwardness, says that he will no longer fight Sanusi. It is noticeable from his face that he himself is not very happy about such a prospect. But at the moment, the guy is obviously powerless. After a long conversation in the living room, Saiga leaves the mansion and goes outside, clearly thinking seriously about something and looking ahead into the distance. He looks closely at his hand, which has undergone some changes after a month of training. After diligent sword training, very noticeable calluses have appeared on his palm, which have rubbed off after prolonged work with the weapon. The guy looks from his hand to the night sky and still can't believe the fact that someone trained for 500 years unlike him, which is just hard to believe. Several days have passed since Saiga fought Sansui. Since then, no shocks have occurred. At the moment, Lady Dewey is relaxing in a room in the mansion, spending time with a cup of tea and sweets. Throughout her long tea party, and the rest that came with it, Dewey watched as Rain scolded her father, Sansui, standing right in front of him, which looked quite comical. Rain looks at Sansui carefully, and with a menacing tone of voice, calling him daddy. Asks if he knows the reason why his daughter is angry. In fact, knowing the answer to this question in advance, the hero sits humbly on his knees before her and says that he understands perfectly well the reason why Rain is so outraged. It is clear that he feels extremely awkward after the truth was revealed. It turns out that, in fact, the fact that Sansui was not the girl's biological father, Rain had already figured out on her own a long time ago, so she wasn't angry about it. But still there was one but, about which the girl really harbored a small grudge. Having learned the truth about her name, the girl began to remind the hero of it at every convenient moment for her. This time she again proves to Sansui that one cannot come up with a name for a child spontaneously. The girl menacingly says that he needs to spend much more time choosing a name. Of course, she also reminds him that she likes her name. Sansui expresses her sincere regrets to her daughter. This comical picture is watched by Brower and Du, who are sitting nearby. The lady quietly chuckles, watching what is happening, while her assistant does not know how to react to this. Suddenly someone knocks on the door, thereby distracting all the heroes in the room from their activities. This man turns out to be Happen. The girl asks if Dewey is in the room and if she is free now. Hearing a long, familiar voice, all the people in the room conclude that Happen came to ask to arrange their next duel. Suddenly it turns out that Happen came to visit Dewey not alone, but with her comrades. One of them, of course, is Saiga. He, sitting on the couch, guiltily lowers his head, immediately after which he quietly says that he admits his defeat. Du mockingly remarks that he lost the previous 3 times and said nothing about it, so his words really amazed the girl. Sansui, in turn, says nothing about it. Happen realizes that Saiga is finally ready to give in. The girl also thinks to herself that despite the guy being unhappy with what's happening, there's nothing they can do anyway. Suddenly, Du says that admitting one's own mistakes is already progress, thus making it clear that even Saiga is not standing still in its development. Neither Happen nor her comrades know how to respond to these words. Suddenly, Saiga says that Du is absolutely right and that his childish antics caused everyone a lot of inconvenience. Du continues the dialogue and asks if the guy is really going to end with these useless competitions. Brower and Sansui, standing behind her, understand that this is simply impossible. Saiga says that the problem was that the guy didn't want to believe in his defeat until the very end. He admits that he just wanted to fight Sansui, but nothing more. Du asks in bewilderment if such goals don't seem stupid and senseless to the guy, but he again guiltily replies that the girl is right about everything. Saiga sincerely says that now he will use his powers only to protect everyone. Hearing this, the girls who are on the same team with him are delighted. Sansui, in turn, understands that the guy, while at a meeting with the others, is trying to say something cool, but remembers that if the attack had hit him then, there would have been nothing left of him. The hero also looks at XX and realizes that everything looks as if fate played a joke on this legendary sword that Saiga found, and which his teacher once owned. The sword itself, in the form of a man, decides to intervene in the conversation. The boy asks if he can change the subject. He states that he has mixed feelings about Suiboki's student, who serves a very ordinary person. Suddenly, Rain decides to say something. The girl asks if Master Suiboki himself doesn't serve anyone. Sansui himself tries to imagine what his teacher was like when he was young, but he understands that it would be extremely difficult to come up with something like that. Do also notes that even she would be quite interested to hear what kind of person her bodyguard's teacher was. X looks at her carefully, after which he says that he would not like to discuss the life of his previous owner in front of his new one. The guy, seeing the obvious interest from those around him, nevertheless rethinks something and says that if the guests insist, then he can tell about the hero's teacher right now. Such a sharp change of thought surprises everyone present in the living room. According to Exis, Sibuki was an extremely vain but incredibly ambitious man. He also recalls that his previous master's character was so strong and unwavering that it was completely unthinkable for him to serve under someone else, or protect someone like Sansui does. Brewer and Sansui, listening attentively to the boy's story, are very surprised that he changed his mind so quickly and decided to tell everything he knows to other people. Although just a few minutes ago he said that he would not tell anything about his former master. However, XEX continues to say that no one knows exactly how many countries were destroyed after they incurred the wrath of the powerful Suiboki. In addition, the boy also says that his previous master channeled his anger in a different direction after the destruction of these countries. X recalls how his previous owner could easily make a volcano erupt. At this time, someone is standing outside the door of Du's room, eavesdropping on the conversation in it. The boy continues to talk about how, by practicing his skills, his master once turned the fox into a wasteland. Those sitting in the living room listen attentively to the sword story. Sansui, hearing such information, understands that his teacher managed to create many different and controversial things. At this time, Rain turns to his father and says that it is wonderful that Sansui is a student of such a strong man. The hero does not respond to this, but smiles silently. Sansui thinks that he is not sure how he feels about the past and his teacher. But if his daughter feels better after hearing such news, then he is happy. The guy also understands that he is definitely amazed by the deeds of the master. At this time, two unknown people, wandering through the forest, come across two moss-covered stones lying on top of each other, and conclude that there is probably a grave in front of them. Dressed in hooded robes that hide their faces well, one of them says it would be much easier for them if there was a name on the grave. They are called from behind. The strangers turn around in fear, clearly tense. The man who approached them turns out to be Suiboki. He asks if the guys know that robbing graves is not a very good occupation. The unknown assailants, seeing that they have been exposed, immediately take out their daggers, preparing to rush into the attack and mercilessly kill the witness. Suiboki, in turn, asks them to simply calm down. He notes that, apparently, they are not simple mercenaries, deciding to resolve the issue peacefully. Suiboki approaches the strangers and asks if they would like to know who is buried in this grave. The guys don't answer, still tense, silently nodding, deciding to listen to what Suiboki is going to tell them. Suiboki says that about 5 years ago, a woman with a silver-haired baby came to this place, where she was attacked by wolves. He also says that they were too late to save her, so he buried her here. One of the mercenaries asks what ultimately happened to the baby who had silver hair. Suiboki smiles sincerely and calmly replies that his student once took custody of her. He also adds that the girl may have grown up in the human world a long time ago. He makes it clear to the mercenaries that she is not in this forest. In any case, the mercenaries exchange glances, nod to each other, turn around and disappear into the dense bushes of the forest. Suiboki, watching what is happening, realizes that he is happy that the people he met are able to reason. He notes that he does not know what they wanted. Besides this, Suiboki also wonders how his student is doing. He is genuinely interested in whether Sansui is coping in a new world for him. Another conversation is taking place in the academy director's office. The girl turns to the headmistress and says that no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find him, and there are no leads on the identity of this person. The young dark-haired girl talking to the headmistress turns out to be Stando Arcana, the first princess of the Arcana Kingdom. The headmistress smiles gratefully at the girl who told her the latest news, and says that she always knows what rumors are circulating around the academy. The headmistress compares the rumors to a jar full of moths, which, once opened, will definitely end up everywhere, and compares this to the situation with the rumors about the young swordsman. Stando Arcana reports to the headmistress what she has learned and says that Shirokuro Sansui is indeed a swordsman who is over 500 years old. The girl, telling about this, squeezes the paper on which the information was written in her hands, and says that it is hard to believe in the truth of this whole story. But, knowing about his power, the girl definitely experiences a strange feeling. The headmistress is silent. The headmistress says that it is also hard for her to think that the boy will not be able to defeat Sir Sansui. But Sir Saiga is still quite skilled. The girl seriously says that now everything is happening exactly as they all assumed. It turns out that right now Saiga is several times stronger than the members of the Royal Guard. But despite this, the guy can still become even stronger. Stando Arcana looks thoughtfully out the window and, after remaining silent for a couple of seconds, seriously states that the royal family cannot afford to fall behind under any circumstances. The girl decides that they need the royal family to find a suitable ward as soon as possible, so that this person would be very similar to Saiga but terrible. She says that this person should be different and have strength and abilities. Stando Arcana understands that he needs someone who will definitely surpass Shirokuro Sansui in strength and be able to withstand him, as well as his lightning blade. At this time, another conversation, not the most pleasant for Sansui, takes place in Dewey's mansion. Lady Spade says thoughtfully that she certainly thought that Sansui was older than all of them, but she could not have imagined that by as much as 500 years. The hero dejectedly realizes that as soon as Rain stopped reproaching him, his mistress immediately picked up on this idea, not sparing her bodyguard at all. The guy doesn't look at the girl and, without raising his head, says that he offers the girl his most sincere apologies for his silence. Suddenly, Dewey says that if the truth has come out in such an unexpected way, then she needs to reconsider the whole situation concerning Sansui and Brower. Brower, hearing this, is a little confused, but says nothing. Dewey continues his monologue and states that she cannot force her assistant to marry some 500-year-old grandfather, as she calls Sansui. It is noticeable that Lady Spade looks very thoughtful. Dewey says that no matter if 10 or 20 years pass, the guy remains the same as he is now, and does not change one bit. Lady Spade tries to suggest what will happen if Brower marries Sansui, but before she can say a word, she immediately falls silent. Suddenly, the girl realizes that if Heppen marries Saiga while Brower marries Sansui, then Dewey will be left completely alone, so she decides not to say anything right away, but to think a little about what can be done about it. The girl's mood is rapidly falling, and she does not know what to do. Rain notices this. Dewey says that he will postpone such a difficult question for later. She leans dejectedly on the arm of the sofa and falls silent, clearly not in the best of spirits. She says that she has no time to think about it, and again repeats the words about the wedding of Brower and Sansui. Suddenly, Dewey declares that she absolutely must find someone for herself. The girl also adds that this someone must be cute and have a suitable pedigree. In addition, the personality of this person will in no way embarrass Dewey. The girl says loudly and confidently that the man she marries will definitely be strong enough to end up in the Spade family. Dewey also says that the person she chooses will definitely meet the requirements of her father and older brother. Sansui, hearing this, thinks that she strongly doubts that Dewey will be able to find such a person. Suddenly, the difficult conversation and at the same time monologue of Dewey with her subordinates is interrupted by an unexpected knock on the door. Hearing it, all four guys who are in the living room turn towards the door. The man knocking on the door turns out to be a knight. After waiting a bit and seeing that no one has opened the door, he loudly says that he has not come empty-handed, and he has a message for Dewey from the Caputo family. Still no one opens the door, and the knight louder declares that he is not going to talk to Lady Spade, and asks if the girl is free at the moment. He, already squeezing the small envelope with the letter in his hand even more tightly, says even louder that the message he brought to the girl is really very urgent. After waiting a little, the knight still manages to get into the mansion and then into Dewey's chambers. Having heard from whom the knight brought the message, Lady Spade is sincerely surprised that the letter came from the Caputo family and wonders what could be in it. The knight takes a few steps closer to Dewey, kneels down in front of her, and hands her an envelope. He says that the letter he brought was written in a hurry by Mrs. Pallet Caputo. Dewey takes the envelope in his hands in surprise and, having examined it carefully, is surprised that the letter was written by Pallet Caputo herself. The girl slowly opens the envelope and takes out a neatly folded sheet of paper. She unfolds the letter and begins to read. At the beginning of the letter, Pallet addresses Dewey Spade. Lady Caputo then writes that she sincerely asks the girl for forgiveness for her rudeness. and also for not coming and addressing her personally. Also after the letter there is information that on the same day, an experienced swordsman arrived from abroad, and this person is contacting the strongest swordsman in their entire country through them. Sansui at this time does not suspect anything. Afterwards, Palette writes that he will tell Dewey all the details when they meet, and asks the girl to be sure to visit the lands of the Caputo family, together with the swordsman Shirokuro Sansui. Lady Caputo claims in her letter that only Sansui will be able to cope with and defeat the swordsman who arrived in their lands, since he is a holy sword with the face of a child. While Dewey reads the letter, the hero thinks about who sent it, and remembers that Palette Caputo is far from a simple girl. It turns out that, along with the Spade House and the Batcherable House, the Caputo family is one of the 4 great families, wielding great power and influence. Sansui understands that if Palette Caputo herself approached Dewey, then this is definitely not an ordinary matter. Suddenly, the girl turns to the knight and asks if he knows the contents of the letter, to which he replies that he is familiar with what is in it. Dewey asks what kind of swordsman Palette Caputo described in her letter is like. Having heard such a question, the knight does not quite understand what kind of answer Lady Spade wants to hear from him, so he asks her about it again. Seeing the knight's bewilderment, the girl immediately explains that she wants to know, for example, whether the guy is handsome. The knight, in turn, immediately replies that the swordsman who arrived is a fairly energetic and young guy. The knight also says that the newly arrived swordsman is acting very refined, so he must be from a good family. Upon hearing this, Dewey immediately decides to find out more about him. The knight says that the swordsman is so strong that only Sansui can defeat him. This guy is also a refined and well-mannered handsome man. Suddenly, Dewey declares that this man may well be worthy of the girl. Finally, Lady Spade announces to her comrades that they will all certainly pay Caputo a visit soon. Finally, fulfilling her recent promise, Lady Dewey and her subordinates pay a visit to the Caputo family, arriving on their territory accompanied by a knight sent to her. As the girl and her friends walk through the family's property, they notice that there are many homeless, emaciated people around who do not stop talking. The knight turns to Dewey and says that he apologizes for the inconvenience. He also adds that Miss Palette would like to greet them once they arrive, and he will be sure to take them to her. As the heroes walk towards their destination, Sansui realizes that despite the fact that his mistress, Dewey, is already quite a mature girl, she still does not have a fiancé. He recalls that the girl often got everything she wanted from an early age, but her father and brother would never allow her to get engaged. Sansui recalls how creepy they look. However, the hero also remembers that even despite her older brother and father, he never saw the girl show interest in a man. Suddenly, Rain addresses Brower, calling her auntie, and wants to ask her a question. Brower looks at the girl, waiting for her words. Rain carefully asks Brower what she thinks about the fact that Dewey might like this new swordsman. Brower, looking at Rain, says that she asked a good question. The girl says that she is sure that this swordsman has his own reasons. Sansui, hearing that Brower is talking to Rain, thinks that their concerns are understandable, and there is no guarantee that the meeting will go so easily. They continue walking along a busy city street, where all the residents gather in a crowd, carefully examining something and whispering about something with interest. Dewey and her subordinates approach the crowd, where many people are asking what is going on and trying to figure out if there is a fight. Lady Spade notices that the street has suddenly become very crowded. Suddenly, the girl hears that in front of the crowd, the aristocrat is engaged in battle with a foreign swordsman. Someone in the crowd says that he is very surprised at how strong this swordsman is. Sansui, hearing this, is surprised that the swordsman is a foreigner. Dewey, having heard what is really happening on the street, is very surprised by this. It is noticeable that she's very interested in what is happening. Looking at Dewey, Sansui realizes that she has her powerful charm. The sudden hero sees this foreign swordsman. He has dark skin, dark hair, and is very handsome. A swordsman who has recently arrived to the lands looks at the knight he has defeated and remarks that the people in these lands are very small. He also adds that they will not be able to take his head as easily as they think. The hero, having finished examining the soldiers defeated by the swordsman, decides to look at how his mistress reacts to this. Suddenly, he notices that Dewey is genuinely delighted. She looks at the swordsman with admiration. Brower and Rain, somewhat shocked, notice that Lady Spade the swordsman, who has just recently arrived in the country, has taken a great liking to them. Sansui looks on as he admires the new swordsman Dewey. He realizes that the world seems to revolve around this guy. Suddenly, Dewey and her subordinates are called out by a female voice coming from the other side of the crowd. Some girl turns to them and says contentedly that they have come after all. The person addressing Lady Spade and her subordinates turns out to be Palette Caputo. The girl, coming closer and closer, asks for forgiveness for such an urgent call. This girl looks pretty. She has dark hair and eyes. Dewey, comma-shaped as an old acquaintance, addresses her by name and asks what is happening with the situation she described in her letter. Palette decides to respond immediately. Lady Caputo begins her story and says that quite recently, the other day, Tung, a swordsman, arrived from a very distant country. It turns out that Sir Nurai, a nobleman from the Domino Empire, had caused a huge commotion with the swordsman on the street over some incident. The girl explains that both of these people are confident to the very end that they are right, and neither of them wants to resolve this issue in court. Sansui, listening attentively to Palette Caputo's story, remembers where the Domino Empire is located. The hero also does not forget to mention that a revolution had recently taken place in this country. It turns out that during this revolution, the entire imperial family was captured, and the nobles fled to the neighboring kingdom of Arcana in search of refuge. He realizes that the nobles who fled to the neighboring kingdom are not criminals or anything like that. They just received shelter. However, Sansui thinks that after this, problems began to arise everywhere, but their exact cause is known to absolutely no one. Palette continues his story and says that after the incident, Sir Nurai brought his soldiers with him. Dewey, crossing her arms, says that it is absolutely clear to her which of the participants is truly guilty. The girl says that everything will be fine if they can hand over the nobleman from the Domino Empire. Palette Caputo, hearing this, perks up and says that they can't do this under any circumstances, since they must listen carefully to both sides and then make the right decision. Dewey, hearing this, is clearly unhappy. Suddenly, a swordsman named Tung intervenes in their conversation and says that he has nothing to feel guilty about, and he is not going to take all the blame for the incident on himself. The guy looks very confident. He suddenly declares that if the authorities want to force him to talk, they must first defeat him in battle. First of all, Tung decides to turn to Sansui and, calling him Lord Holy Sword with the face of a child. The heroes, in turn, practically do not react to his words. Dewey smiles and confidently tells his subordinate that he knows exactly what he needs to do. She also asks her bodyguard to hold back in battle so that the swordsman fighting against him will not be harmed in any way. Palette Caputo also says that she also wanted to ask Sansui not to fight at full strength, so that none of the fighters would hurt each other. Sansui, slowly drawing his sword from its sheath, says that people can certainly rely on him, letting them know that he will do everything, fully complying with their requests. As the young man prepares to begin the battle, he glances at the knights defeated by the swordsman, lying unconscious on the ground. At this time, the knights grab the nobleman Nore by both hands to immobilize him. He, hearing the girl's request to Sansui, thinks to himself that their request was very stupid when they told him to restrain himself and not to harm anyone. In his opinion, this is impossible. Nurai continues to think that even though he is a nobleman, his loyal soldiers were so easily defeated by a swordsman who came from another country. At this time, the knights injured in the battle are taken away for treatment. The nobleman, watching the fight begin, concludes that the hero, who seems to him a petty ragamuffin, will not last even a second in battle against the foreign swordsman. Nurai decides that he does not care about the outcome of the battle. He thinks that if the rich Dewey's favorite subordinate dies in battle, then Tung will have to be punished for it anyway. On the other hand, the nobleman decides that if Sansui turns out to be a truly amazing swordsman, then the foreigner will simply die in battle. Nurai concludes that no matter how the circumstances develop and no matter what the outcome of the battle, in any case, he will remain the winner. Tun loudly tells the hero his name. The guy also adds that he would like to know the name of his opponent since he is the strongest swordsman in the country in which the foreigner found himself. The hero, in turn, says that his name is Shirokuro Sansui, and also adds that he is glad to meet his rival. Brewer, watching what is happening, suddenly realizes that Thun is far from the weakest opponent, and he is quite strong, no matter how he may seem. Both Tung and Sansui are ready to begin the battle. Dewey happily declares that the foreigner is strong, handsome, and majestic, so she has absolutely no complaints about him, while Rain shouts to his father that he will definitely be able to defeat his opponent. Palette is worried about the outcome of the battle, And Brower, looking at his mistress, understands that she is truly amazingly lucky. Everyone who's gathered outside that day is ready to start watching the battle that is about to begin. Du is confident while Pallet is worried. Brewer remains calm, and Nurai hopes for the best outcome for himself. Both swordsmen are ready to cross their weapons. They hold them at the ready, holding them straight out in front of them. The first to decide to attack is the foreign swordsman, Tung, and uses a skill called Dance of the Faithful Shadow. Immediately after the guy says it, he moves forward with lightning speed, making a sound that matches such a fast movement. Brower, Dewey, and Pallet are incredibly surprised by what they have to see, as Tung turns out to be quite strong. Finally, when Tung approaches Sansui as close as possible, he, without wasting a second, instantly repels his attack. The ringing clang of weapons is heard. Both swordsmen continue to try to strike each other, but they are constantly repelled, fighting equally. Finds herself fully manages to strike his opponent on the head with his sword, but to the surprise of those around him, he suddenly disappears. It turns out that it was his shadow. Tung is amazed by Sansui's skill with the sword. This time he uses the skill Dance of Captivating Shadows, but he is more serious. With this skill, Tung creates several copies of himself around himself. This time, 3 opponents rush at once to attack Sansui, preparing to attack him mercilessly. The hero, in turn, skillfully repels the attacks of both clones of the swordsman, causing them to disappear, thanks to the fact that he strikes his sword to the head. When he gets rid of the last shadow, he looks at his real opponent. Sansui and Tung smile at each other, realizing that they have finally found their equal opponents. It is noticeable that both guys are pleased with the battle. Du admiringly notes that Tung has the ability to create beautiful copies of himself, which is a rather rare ability. Pallet, observing Sansui's actions, says that he is doing his job very well here. At this time, Nure, extremely worried about what is happening on the battlefield, does not know what to do. Brower and Rain, standing nearby, notice that their comrade is incredibly strong. But even despite this, his opponent is not inferior to him at all. Sansui understands his opponent's tactics. The hero concludes that Tung is really trying to overwhelm him with blows. It turns out that Sansui understood his opponent's tactics a little earlier than he started fighting him, and he found it strange that the soldiers had a lot of scratches. The guy concludes that Tung can only exercise precise control over one of his copies. On the other hand, the hero also understands that even without such a good ability, Tung still remains a very skilled swordsman. Strength a little more. Sansui comes to the conclusion that, given his physical strength, he is probably slightly stronger than Brower. Suddenly, Tung says that this battle was worth it for him to leave his homeland and go on such a long journey. The guy also says that he can't even imagine how a swordsman of Sansui's caliber could reach such heights. At this time, Tung prepares to strike again. Running away, the guy loudly declares that he believes that Sansui is worthy of witnessing his secret technique. Around Tung, many copies of himself appear again, rushing towards the hero. One of them shouts that he is ready to use his counterattack. Dewey, Pallet, Rain, and Brewer, looking at the number of copies that Toon managed to create, are simultaneously delighted and horrified. It turns out that the move Tung uses is called Dance of True Darkness. The copies run quickly, almost flying, to attack Sansui, but he is in no hurry to dodge. This attack of Tuna's is a finishing blow. That is, a wave attack that uses reaction time. It turns out that if you try to defeat the shadow, as before, then at this time, the guy is attacked by another shadow. Ordinary people would not be able to dodge such a blow. At this time, Sansui copes with such a task perfectly. Tung understands that if he were to fight an ordinary person, he would have lost long ago. But since he is fighting a master, he will have the opportunity to graze. At this time, the hero dodges another attack of the shadow. Noticing this, Tung suddenly raises his saber above his head and realizes that he knew that Sansui could handle such a task. The foreigner understands that. Be that as it may, he now has an excellent opportunity to attack his opponent. Tung is ready to deliver the decisive blow to Sansui, deciding that he will defeat him by chopping the hero himself. Suddenly, something does not go according to the swordsman's plan, which surprises him greatly. It turns out that Tung realizes that his opponent is completely missing his wooden sword, which he used to fight with before. The guy just runs at him with his bare hands. Tung is already lowering his saber, clearly understanding that everything is going absolutely not as he had planned. Suddenly, something happens to his weapon. Sansui suddenly reaches for his saber, and before Tung can even figure out what just happened, he intercepts it and places it right in front of his opponent's throat. He is shocked and does not move. Dewey asks Brower in surprise if the battle is over already, to which her subordinate replies that it probably is, deciding not to drag out the battle any longer. Sansui moves away from Tung's throat and remarks contentedly that it looks like he has won this battle. Tun, looking at his opponent with admiration, enthusiastically says that during the battle he couldn't even reach the guy, so he definitely admits his defeat. Dewey happily turns to his bodyguard and declares that he did a very good job. Standing nearby, Pallet admiringly says that the duel, which she was able to observe, was simply wonderful. Brower, standing in the crowd, realizes that at the moment when Sansui was so many shadows, the ball was no longer with him. The girl remembers the episode of the battle in the most vivid colors and understands that the hero probably calculated Tung's actions. Tung admits that he really underestimated Sansui. The guy also says that no matter what techniques his opponent used, he was still confident that the skill summoning shadows would definitely help him win. Sansui, listening to Tung's words, says that his secret technique was amazing, but he was still able to read his opponent's actions. The hero explains that when Tung released so many shadows, he immediately realized that there were only two possible outcomes. Either they would surround him and strike, or they would bombard him with attacks to force him to open up. Tun, after listening to his opponent's explanation, approaches Pallet and thanks her for fulfilling his long-standing wish. The girl, having heard the thanks addressed to her, asks if the swordsman is ready to start a trial regarding the incident on the street. Tun is confident and satisfied and answers that he is certainly ready. He says that now it is his turn to fulfill the girl's desire. Hearing this, Nurei, who is standing nearby, is horrified. Pallet calmly, with a smile on his face, turns to the nobleman and asks him if he is ready to resolve the dispute with Tung in court, to which he twitches in fear. She reminds the nobleman that just recently he said that if Tung agrees to the trial, then he will also participate. Nurei, all trembling with fear, suddenly says that this time nothing will work out, since he has urgent and pressing matters. Pallet, who is approached by numerous knights, happily says that the trial will not take long. She also adds that this time they have called the Sieve family's mages, so it'll be over much sooner than he thinks. Nurei, stumbling with fear, tells the girl to stop saying such things and that he doesn't want to deal with magicians. Dewey, watching this picture, says that this situation looks very interesting. She turns to Sansui and, seeing how Nerea is being led away by the knights, asks the guy if they should watch the trial, clearly counting on a positive answer. Dew approaches Sansui and tells Rain and Brower that they both don't have to go with them if they don't want to, since everything that happens could really shock the girl. Rain and Brower decide not to go with Dewey and Sansui to the trial. Instead, they take a walk around the city. Suddenly, Rain hears a conversation coming from the neighboring house they are walking next to. It turns out that a girl and a man are talking. The girl asks if the guy knows that foreign swordsman. She also says that she heard him challenge a holy sword with a child's face to a duel. The guy says that he wonders who won. The guy asks the girl if she has seen the face of this swordsman and what kind of person he is. The girl replies that the holy sword with the face of a child won. She also adds that even though his face was very childish, he didn't look cute or cool, ill ordinary, and asks her what she thinks about Mrs. Dewey being able to marry Mr. Tung. Brewer, after thinking hard about it, says that it depends on the previous and current chapters, but even so, it is still possible. Rain goes on to say that Tuna must have been cool, to which Brower dejectedly replies that it annoys her. After the battle, Dewey appreciates the swordsman. Suddenly, the girl's face takes on a serious expression, and she, turning to Brewer, asks if the girl will also fall in love with Tuna. Brewer, in turn, hearing this, is perplexed. She asks, confused and surprised, where the girl got such thoughts from. Rain, with a sad tone in her voice, explains that Brower can no longer marry her father. Replies that this is true and this question must be worrying the girl a lot. Brower continues to speak and fondly recalls how she always accompanied Mrs. Dewey from her childhood. The girl touches her heart and says that because she was always protecting Dewey, she must not know what love is. Suddenly, Brewer's smile becomes even more sincere. The girl says that, be that as it may, there is no other person in the world whom she would like to marry. Rain, clearly happy with this answer, asks Brower to finally pull herself together and tell both the girl's father and her mistress about this feeling. Brower says that the girl is right. Finally, Brower and Rain reach the Caputo estate. Time passes and Rain, sitting in one of the many rooms of the estate, turns to Brower, saying that the time has come, that the girl says that Dewey and Sansui should return soon. Brower, thinking that Sansui should return soon, remembers their previous conversations and believes that this time everything will be better. Finds herself facing an impossible minute tour. Finds herself Frangul, sitting on a chair, happily announces that her father and Dewey are finally back. Lady Spade is the first to enter the room and happily informs her subordinates that the test they were put through was amazing, because it involved the use of cursed magic. Sansui comes in after her, no longer looking so enthusiastic. Rain tries to find out if he is okay, to which he dejectedly replies that he is okay. Brower understands that now is not the time to talk about marriage. Pallet says that they used cursed magic at the meeting, so that if a person lied, they would turn into stone. Toon supports her and says that it was thanks to this method that they were able to reveal the truth in this story. It turns out that the nobleman who started the conflict with the swordsman did not have the most noble intentions. In fact, Nure apparently plotted to harm the girl. Few are surprised to hear this. Dewey also explains that it was Thun who wanted to stop them, which is why she entered the conflict he was involved in. Brower says she knew this. Tun recounts how, as they walked outside, their argument escalated, and so the boy took out his sword. Dewey shares her memories of how when she looked at this nobleman, his expression was simply priceless. The girl chuckles at this. Pallet Caputo says that in order to protect the people in their country, they resorted to cursed magic during the trial. She turns to Tuna, and with a serious face asks for forgiveness for this. The guy, in turn, says that he himself caused a stir in foreign lands and gave childish explanations in his own defense. So, he is no less guilty than that nobleman. He turns to Pallet and says sincerely that the only person who should apologize in this situation is himself. Tung looks at Pallet and says that being exposed to cursed magic was a valuable experience, and it was also nice to see this dishonest noble admit his guilt with his own mouth. So the girl has nothing to worry about. Brower and Sansui look at Tung in shock, realizing that not only does he look cool, but the ideas he holds are already great. Meanwhile, Rain and Dewey look at the swordsman and admire him. Suddenly, Tung turns to the hero and says that despite everything that happened, he is glad that he was able to see the holy sword in action in today's battle. The guy sincerely admits that he was delighted by the skill of the holy sword with the face of a child. Suddenly, Toon gets up from his seat at the table, approaches the hero, which greatly surprises Rain, kneels before him and says that he begs Sansui to take him as a student. The hero, watching this picture, is perplexed and thinks that he simply showed what he can do in battle. The guy sincerely does not understand why the swordsman bows to him. Ju, very glad that she got such a chance, says that in this case, Tung can always move to her residence. The boy, hearing such good news, joyfully pronounces his name in full. It turns out that his name is Tun Ma Jan. The swordsman also says that he is eagerly awaiting the instructions of his new teacher. Suddenly, upon hearing the name of their new comrade, everyone present in the hall instantly fell silent, perplexed. Pallet turns to Tung and asks cautiously, apologetically, if the name Sunny means anything to him. The guy looks at her with an ambiguous look. Suddenly, Toon says that this name belongs to his younger sister. Immediately after he asks how they know about this name, a terrifying chain of events immediately forms in Dewey's mind, which he immediately shares with Tung. It turns out that his younger sister has become engaged to Saika. Hearing the news that his younger sister is engaged to someone, he is horrified and lets everyone present in the hall know about it. He suddenly gets up from the table and shouts that this is simply unacceptable. He absolutely needs to sort this situation out, thereby frightening Pallet, who is sitting next to him. Lady Caputo says in confusion that even if she didn't know what had caused the prince of the other side to be subjected to the curse magic, she still couldn't send him away without a formal apology. It's clear that the girl is scared. Dewey, in turn, is very upset by this news. At this time, Tung turns to Pallet and says that he urgently needs to sort everything out as quickly as possible, and the girl should postpone his departure. Suddenly, hearing the guy's pleas, a dejected Dewey turns to the confused Pallet. She, holding her head with one hand, says that this situation also worries her a little, so Tung can just go with them. There, the guy, having heard such news, rejoices at it. Dewey says that it is in his own interests to go with them. Pallet expresses his regrets to Lady Spade. Toon thanks the girl for her support. Suddenly, Brower notices that in such a marriage, Dewey will not have any problems with his pedigree, since Mr. Thun unexpectedly for everyone turned out to be a prince. Dewey, in turn, still continues to cover her eyes with her hand and dejectedly think about the fact that she must have to become a relative of Heppen. And now she experiences an indescribable feeling. Dewey, Sansui, Rain, Brower, and Toon get into the carriage to leave the kingdom of Caputo. Pallet goes outside the city gates to say goodbye to his guests. The girl calls them to come again. In the carriage, Dewey decides to start a conversation first and says that they are now heading to the Batrable estate to meet Sir Tuna's sister. Tun, having already heard many stories about his sister, sighs heavily and concludes that she has apparently brought a lot of trouble to the kingdom of Arkan. Dewey says dejectedly that she is not so much worried about Tuna's sister as about her fiancé. Saying this, the girl sighs heavily. Brower and Sansui understand that she is telling the truth. Suddenly, Toon happily remarks that if you look at the situation from the other side, he was incredibly surprised that Sir Sansui is a real sage. The swordsman says that in his country there is a legend about sages, and he was able to verify its truth after seeing the strength of the hero. He says that he was grateful to receive instructions from one who had practiced the art of swordsmanship for 500 years. Sansui thinks that if he continues to refuse Tun, Dewey will most likely get angry at him. He also understands that he is very uncomfortable saying no to someone who is capable of bowing his head so low. The hero says that he will try. Hearing this, Tung is overjoyed. Dewey, in turn, says that Sansui will certainly help him. However, the hero decides to clarify something else. He says that before he starts teaching another person, he wants to go and ask his teacher for permission to do so. Dewey calmly replies that if that's all the guys need, then he can go to him himself. To this, Sansui replies that, regarding this, there is one small snag. Sansui's face becomes sad and explains that until Rain becomes an adult, he can under no circumstances return to the forest. He also mentions that this was an order from the teacher. Dewey thinks entirely says that it is impossible to avoid. After waiting a little more, she says that she will call this teacher herself. She notes that they are already on their way to the Hoppen estate, so in any case they can ask XX for help. Tun asks the girl for forgiveness, but then says that they really do a lot for him. Dewey, smiling, replies that the guy does not need to apologize, since she herself is also interested in meeting her bodyguard's teacher. Lady Spade also sarcastically remarks that they have a 500-year-old man who can't even ask a question on his own, so Tung should not worry if he can't help right now. Dewey also turns to his assistant. She says that Brower was very close to practically marrying such an old man. Rain and Bauer agree that now is the time to act. Bauer abruptly leaves his seat in the carriage and turns to Dewey. She says that she has something she wants to discuss regarding her engagement to Sansui. Since the decision has been made, Brower collects his thoughts and spends all his courage to ask his mistress to reconsider her decision about the engagement once more. Upon hearing this, Sanusi is very surprised. Dewey, clearly not expecting such a turn of events, turns to Brower and asks if the girl really wants this, to which she immediately replies that she is confident in her decision. Dewey approaches Sansui and tells him that if the two of them are going to get married, then he will have to tell his teacher. Before they meet him, the guy needs to make sure that he has discussed everything thoroughly and made a decision with Brower. Brower, hearing such words, is delighted and says that he hopes that Sansui is ready for this. The guy, embarrassed, says that such questions are better discussed upon returning to the estate. Tung, watching what was happening, smiles and notes that the holy sword turned out to be even more interesting than he imagined. Finally, after some time of not the easiest, but eventful trip, the heroes arrive at the Badgerable estate. They meet the Heppen family in the large living room. Tung speaks first. The guy talks about all the shame they brought to Mrs. Heppen's fiancé. The guy says that after learning that the royal family of his country, including his sister, intends to preserve the bloodline, they continue to treat them as nobles and not as scoundrels. Heppen's close associates clearly feel uneasy. Toon bows his head and says that on behalf of the king, their father, he asks forgiveness for his sister's indecent behavior. The first to respond to this is the oldest of the entourage, Heppen. The man says that Tung does not need to apologize under any circumstances, since they will continue to treat the boys with respect. Tung looks disapprovingly at his sister. He addresses her by name and says that she continues to do whatever she wants. It is noticeable that Suni is afraid of her older brother. Toon turns to his sister and says indignantly that, unlike him, the girl has a right to the throne, so she should think about their mother and father. Suni bows her head in disappointment and says that she has no excuse. Suddenly, Tan turns to Saiga and asks if he was engaged to his sister, to which the guy fussily replies that he understood everything correctly. Tan seriously says that his sister is to blame, but Saiga also shares the blame with her, since he is engaged to the girl. The guy, stuttering, desperately says that he was serious in his feelings for Suni. Tan menacingly says that if Saiga was serious, he probably knew what was preventing them from being together. After waiting a bit and finally realizing the seriousness of the situation, Saiga upsetly says that Tan is right. Dewey, in turn, sighs heavily. She looks at Happen with disappointment and says that it turns out that Sir Tung and Miss Suni really were brother and sister. The girl feels relieved that she did not become related to Happen. Immediately after this, Lady Spade addresses Saiga, calling him the future head of the House of Betrayal, to which he immediately responds. The girl says that they want to meet Suiboki, so they want Saiga to lend them the divine sword. Sansui intends to take on a student and teach him the art of the sword, but to do so, he must first ask permission from his teacher. Happen and the man sitting next to him exclaim that the holy sword has never achieved full mastery of his art, even after training for 500 years straight. Sansui, hearing their surprise, says that compared to his teacher, he is still a beginner. Suddenly, a sword appears next to Saiga and turns into a boy. Exec says that their visit is very timely, since he himself has a couple of things that he would really like to tell Suiboki. Suddenly, Saiga declares that in that case, he too will go to meet the teacher, since he really wants to meet him. Hearing Saiga's intentions, Happen immediately says that if he goes, then she will go with him. Suni also decides to join the upcoming meeting, jumping up from the sofa. A worried Suga, standing nearby, asks if everything will be okay. X says that Suiboki might not like it very much that such a large crowd came to meet him. Sansui, hearing such concerns, says that his teacher would not be against it. Suddenly, the hero decides to clarify his words and says that he has never seen his teacher get angry about anything. Dewey concludes that everything will probably be fine, so they should go visit Suiboki the next morning. Hearing this, Sansui is horrified. He realizes that he has discussed practically nothing about his marriage with Brower. He realizes that all he has ever done is train with a sword. Rain, looking happily at her father, joyfully says that now he can discuss everything about the wedding with the teacher. The girl turns to Brower and sees that she is not at all happy with the state of affairs. It turns out that Brewer is upset that Sansui, as it seems to her, is not going to propose to her. Suddenly, the girl thinks that perhaps she should propose to him. Rain turns to Brower in fear, seeing her mood. Neither Brower nor Sansui understand at all what they should do in such a difficult situation. Upon returning to Mrs. Dewey's residence, Brower and Sansui meet alone, as Lady Spade had advised. They stand in one of the corridors of the mansion, hesitating to say anything to each other. Sansui thinks that he feels like he should start the conversation first. But the guy stands there and doesn't know what to do. Brower, being next to her lover, is very frightened by the fact that he says nothing. She decides to be brave. Suddenly, the hero turns to Brewer and tells her to say what she wanted to say. Out of fear, the girl blurts out that everything is fine and she will definitely tell everything. After this awkward scene, Brewer realizes that she has just interrupted Sansui, which makes her feel even more awkward. Sansui thinks that 500 years have passed since he entered another world. But for the first time in these years, he feels normal when he is with the girl. The hero looks again at the bustling Brower and realizes that he is deceiving himself. At this time, the girl thinks about what she should say to her lover. She understands that she cannot simply ask him to marry her, as it would be shameless. Brewer imagined that an ordinary girl would say if she were in her place. Brewer finally collects his thoughts and, closing his eyes, loudly tells Sansui to take responsibility. The hero, completely stunned by such words, says that he will definitely do it, but thinks to himself that he does not understand what exactly he needs to take responsibility for. At this time, standing near the wall in the corridor, Dewey and Rain are watching this picture, being in a slight shock. The girl is the first to notice that everything that is happening looks somehow very unromantic. The next morning, all the heroes leave the mansion and meet near the carriages in order to go to meet with teacher Suiboki. Sansui and Brower stand next to each other. The sudden hero happily says that after their conversation last night, he and the girl finally decided to get married. Hearing this, all the people around them are delighted, except for Exo, who is standing in front of everyone. Immediately after this, Rain approaches Brower and asks if everything is okay with the girl, to which she replies that she would prefer not to talk about it. This awkward scene is interrupted by Dewey, who says that if the two of them are finished, then it's time for them to go to Suiboki. They need to get to the dense forest, which is located on the outskirts of the Kingdom of Arcana. Before everyone leaves, Sansui asks Lady Spade to convey his deep respect to the master, to which the girl replies that she will definitely do so. Everyone who is going to go to the forest to meet them is in a good mood, but XX is the one who is most excited about the upcoming meeting. When the heroes finally find themselves in the forest, Saga decides to gossip a little with Heben, and says that he was very surprised to hear that Sansui was going to get married. The girl says that she did not expect such news either, but she still congratulates Brower. Hearing the congratulations, Brower thanks the girl. Rain says that it is time for them to stop this conversation, and asks how long they have been walking. The girl also notes that they know that they will meet Suiboki if they enter the forest. Suddenly, X says that it is quite possible that the teacher will not appear, since he himself threw the divine sword. Heben asks in surprise why Suiboki decided to leave X in the forest. XX doubtfully replies that he does not know the reason why Suiboki left him in the forest, but he has one guess as to why it happened. Sword seems to think that the teacher no longer needs his power. Suddenly, a male voice is heard from the bushes. This voice says, addressing X, that the problem was something completely different, from behind a nearby tree, and says that he just didn't want his sword to see how pathetic he had become. Everyone is surprised when they see Sansui's teacher suddenly appear. X is the first to speak. He asks if the one standing in front of him is really Suiboki. He notices that the teacher has become much younger. Suiboki, seeing the strong surprise on the boys' faces, says that because he has finally become a real sage, he now looks very young. X says that he sees everything and runs into Suiboki's arms. It is noticeable that both heroes are terribly happy to meet. After the boys tell Suiboki about all the adventures they had to overcome with Sansui, the man says that he now understands everything perfectly. He also notes that over the past 5 years, his student has become truly amazing. Suiboki also says that it is wonderful that Sansui raised a beautiful daughter, found himself a wonderful wife, and serves such a good mistress. Suiboki also says that he is very glad that a swordsman of such a high level like Tung wants to be the hero's disciple. The man says that he is very glad that he was able to raise the strongest swordsman. Dewey asks in surprise if Suiboki is not stronger than the guy. The man decides not to answer anything right away, but to show something to his guests first. Suddenly, he transports them to a completely different part of the forest. It happens instantly. Bauer, realizing what just happened, asks if that technique was called light step. EX also says in surprise that Suiboki is able to use light step on a huge number of people without touching them. Suiboki says quite happily that after XX's imprisonment, he went to this place and started training again. Hearing such a statement, all his guests come into some shock. Suddenly, the man draws Rain's attention to the stones lying on top of each other. He says that it is a grave, and it belongs to the woman who protected the girl, so she needs to pay her respects. Rain approaches the grave, fascinated. She leans towards the stones and, addressing the soul of the man who once saved her, thanks him with all her heart. Suiboki watches this with satisfaction, but then turns away from the girl and addresses the other guests. He says that now they should continue the conversation they started earlier about what the phrase, the strongest person, actually means. Saiga is the first to put forward his assumption, and says that a strong person is a powerful person. Suiboki immediately says that the young man is fundamentally wrong, and being the strongest is just a goal. So for different people, there are different meanings of the word strongest. Suiboki also notices that his own goal of being the strongest, that he pursues, is embodied in Sansui. He explains that the way the hero is now appears to many as reliable, trustworthy, worthy of being taught by a swordsman of Tung's caliber. Saiga enthusiastically asked Suiboki to tell him what an ideal swordsman should be like. Suiboki calmly says that they are all very familiar with Sansui. For this man, the ideal looks exactly like this. He explains his words and says that if the hero wants to hit someone, then he will hit. If he wants to defeat someone, then he will certainly do it. If he wants to kill someone, then he will certainly do it. If he wants to kill someone, then he will kill, since he is capable of doing this too. Sansui has a broad outlook and works hard to assess the situation correctly. Besides this, the hero never stops thinking and always believes in his own strength, which is called the heart of the sword. Suiboki begins to list what he thinks the ideal swordsman should be like. He should enjoy the competition, but not take pleasure in the battle. Be diligent and not be upset by failure. He must also accept challenges of his own free will and give his knowledge to those who ask for it. All these qualities must be possessed by a man who follows the path of the sword. Suiboki says that this is exactly what Sansui is. In addition, the hero also has the knowledge and ability to teach others. Suddenly, Suiboki turns to Saiga and says that he also has his own definition of the strongest. The man is sure of it. Saiga, hearing such words, enthusiastically agrees with the teacher. The guy says that even though he doesn't quite understand what the heart of the sword is, he still has important people he wants to protect. That's why he holds the sword in his hands. Saiga says that his way as a swordsman is to make the impossible possible. Suddenly, the boy asks if he could become stronger if he became Sansui's disciple. Upon hearing this question, Suiboki immediately replies that he could. He also says that he himself might not be able to do it, but if it were Sansui, then it would be possible. Tun, hearing Saiga and Suiboki's speech, affectionately pats his sister on the shoulder and says that Saiga is actually a very good person. Suddenly, Suiboki looks at Rain, who is sitting near the grave. He says that it reminded him of something. The man says that recently a group of mercenaries appeared near this grave. They were trying to find the child. Saiga fearfully asks if Suiboki told them any important information, to which the man replies that he has nothing to hide. Haben says that it would be better if they knew where these mercenaries were from, to which Dewey replies that they would hardly be able to answer that question themselves. Suni thinks about the fact that they were looking for a child who disappeared exactly 5 years ago. Brower says that her words may be cruel, but she does not think that Rain was being looked for. Toon remarks that something must have changed, since they left her alone all the time. He believes that they want to use the girl for something. Happen tries to remember what major change happened 5 years ago. Dewey says with disappointment that she hates to admit it, but it probably has something to do with the Domino Empire. Meanwhile, another serious conversation is taking place at the Caputo estate. This time, the conversation is being conducted by Stando Arcana and Palette Caputo. It turns out that the new government of the Domino Empire has sent its army to the eastern borders of the Caputo family lands. Palette is upset and says that it is true. The girl says that they said that Sir Nurai, as well as the rest of the nobles who sought refuge, must certainly be handed over to them. Arcano notes that this is most likely nothing more than a pretext to help cover up the main point. Palette says, dejectedly, that after all the suffering caused by the previous government, these nobles are probably planning to invade their kingdom in order to profit from other people's wealth. Arcana, in turn, menacingly asks why the girl has not yet asked for help from other great families or the royal family, knowing full well the true intentions of the strangers. She also adds that the new leader of the Domino army is the owner of 4 of the 8 divine artifacts, which is very bad for the other kingdoms. The girl also states, almost shouting, that one of these artifacts, called Anshikyu, is capable of creating a copy of anything. That is why tens of thousands of soldiers in the army of the new government wear the best equipment and fight using the best weapons. Arcana says with horror that the Caputo house will never be able to resist them alone, as it is completely hopeless. Palette repeats Arcana's words that it is hopeless, but then says that perhaps it all looks exactly like that, and they should think the same way. On the other hand, Palette turns to Arcana and says that they are familiar with warriors who can in no way be called ordinary. The girl gives the example of Saiga, who is the future head of the Betrebola family, as well as the strongest swordsman in the kingdom, Sansui, who is very much loved by the people. Arcana literally grinds her teeth in anger and remembers the lightning blade. The girl reveals that the pride of the royal family, the elite royal guard, and the lightning blade were defeated by Sansui alone. She begins to shake with fear, with anger, and says that despite the fact that they were defeated, they all remained alive, and no one was hurt. Palette calmly says that only the Spade family can give orders to Shirokuro Sansui, the strongest swordsman who has lived for over 500 years. Suddenly, the girl also says that the Caputo family, whose magic is thousands of times stronger than the magic of any of the most capable sorcerers in the country. According to Pellet, this powerful mage can use all elements. He is so strong that he can destroy not only an army, but an entire country. Hearing this, Arcana begins to listen more attentively. The Scarred Fool, a man named Colby Shanzo, is the Caputo family's absolute trump card. At this time, this same man stands on the high wall of the castle. He stretches his arms and declares that it looks like it's his turn. After the guy finally finishes the warm-up, he says that he is very glad that his time has finally come. The head of the Caputo family is also on the roof with him, not quite understanding what exactly the magician wants to do. Suddenly, the head of the Caputo family clears his throat into his fist and asks Colby for forgiveness, clearly feeling awkward. Immediately after this, the man says that he asks the magician to take the lives of countless people. Hearing such a request, the guy is not at all embarrassed. On the contrary, he is inspired and says that there is no need to worry, since he is going to work hard. The guy considers himself very cool. The knights, seeing the unhealthy enthusiasm in Colby's eyes, begin to whisper about whether everything will be okay, whether the guy will accidentally end up in the city while attacking enemies. And they understand that if this happens, then his mistake will certainly affect everyone. Suddenly, Kwabi says that they really like difficult tasks. The head of the Caputo family is a little surprised by this statement. The guy says that if he needs to do something to protect the Caputo house, then he will certainly do everything in his power. The head of the family is still not sure of the correctness of his decision, but it is too late to retreat. He tells the magician that everyone believes in him. At this time, an army of soldiers from the Domino Empire is advancing on the gates of Caputo's domain. They move rapidly, without stopping for a second, raising dust on the road with their fast steps. The head of the Caputo family begins to command and says that he orders the Caputo family's trump card, Colby Shanzo, to teach the uninvited guests a lesson by severely punishing them. Boy, don't waste a second on useless thoughts. He says he will carry out any order. He raises his hands above his head and prepares to begin the attack. Suddenly, a small fireball begins to form above Colby's palms, turning into a giant blazing sphere. Once the cloud of energy is the right size, Colby sends it towards the enemies approaching the gate. The Domino Knights do not immediately notice the approaching danger. As they walk, they cheerfully talk about how they must be very close to Caputo's domain. Many of them cannot wait until they finally get to the right place. Suddenly, one soldier points his finger at the sky and starts screaming in fear. The other knights look where their comrade is pointing and see a huge fireball rushing towards them. They can't believe their eyes. For a couple of seconds, the soldiers stand and watch the huge ball of fire rushing towards them. Finally, one of them says that they need to run away from here quickly, because the ball is flying right at them. Unfortunately, the knights do not have time to move from their place, and a giant fireball falls on them, raising them to the ground. From the high temperatures, the knights' weapons and armor instantly melt, making an unpleasant hissing sound. After the steam from Kube's surprise attack clears, a huge hole in the landscape is revealed on the ground, caused by such a large object hitting the ground. The head of the Caputo family watches all this in shock. After what happened, no one dares to say anything. Finally, the head of the Caputo family can't say anything except to appeal to God. At this time, the magician who completed the attack can't believe what he did, since only one shot was fired. The recently convicted Nuri watches everything that is happening from his window. He is horrified to realize what a powerful magician the Caputo family has been hiding all this time. The man enthusiastically states that if they had such a mage, they would easily return the Domino Empire to its former state. Suddenly, he is interrupted from his thoughts by two people entering the room without knocking. They turn to the nobleman and say that they have found her. Nore cannot believe his ears and asks again if the mercenaries really found the one they were looking for. It turns out that all this time they were looking for the last member of the former imperial family. While his comrades are in the forest, Sansui is always near the carriages and watches the entrance to it. Suddenly, the boy hears the sounds of stomping coming from afar. He understands that someone is approaching him. The people who come to the hero turn out to be Dewey's older brother and Father Heppen, and behind them is a small detachment of knights on horseback. The girl's older brother jumps off the horse first and explains to the hero that urgent matters have arisen. Father Heppen appears on the ground after him and asks Sansui for forgiveness for surprising the boy. Dewey's older brother finds out that they arrived at the forest as fast as they could. It turns out that they heard that the boys were heading this way, so they followed them. Suddenly, the boy puts his hand on the sheath of his sword and starts to pull out the blade. He furiously asks where the boy named Tan is, who dared to get close to his sister. It is noticeable that the boy is very angry. Father Heppen, seeing such an ambiguous mood of his fellow traveler, immediately pulls him up and says that this is not what they came to talk about, and the guy knows about it. Sansui, watching such a picture, feels very awkward. Father Heppen's words have a sobering effect on Dewey's older brother. He says that the man is right and puts the sword back in its sheath, after which the hero immediately calms down. The boy looks into the forest and asks Sansui if his sister's group has already entered the forest. The hero uses one of his skills and sees his comrades still in the forest and talking to his teacher, Suiboki. As soon as the hero tells where Dewey is, along with her and her subordinates, he immediately says that they are talking to his teacher. The elder brother Spade thoughtfully says that they really need to talk to the guys as soon as possible. It would be very convenient if they returned as soon as possible. The sudden hero notices that his friends have already arrived back and hurries to tell Dewey's relatives about it. He says it's very fortunate that they're already back. Dewey, Happen, and their subordinates suddenly appear out of nowhere at the exit of the forest with an accompanying popping sound. Brower and Suni look around in fear, realizing that it happened again, and Suiboki sent them through space to the exit. At this time, Dewey and Happen immediately notice their father and older brother near the carriages. Dewey asks in surprise what her older brother is doing in such a place, while Happen asks why her father also came to these woods. Suddenly, the girl's older brother notices who is walking next to her. Tin, seeing a face very similar to the girl's, accompanying him, says that this guy must be Dewey's brother. After that, the swordsman introduces himself. The boy, hearing what his sister's new friend is saying, says that he is the same Toon. It is noticeable that Dewey's older brother is very angry. Tung, in turn, answers in bewilderment that the boy understood everything correctly. Suddenly, Dewey's older brother suddenly pulls his sword out of its sheath, raises it above his head, and is about to hit Tung with it, shouting loudly and furiously for him to die. However, the guy doesn't have time to attack his sister's new acquaintance, as Sansui brings him to his senses by hitting the guy on the head with a wooden sword from behind. Father Heppen is the first to speak. He tells us that after all the heroes went into the forest, they were suddenly contacted by the Caputo house. He goes on to explain that a new domino army came to invade, but luckily they were driven back by a sorcerer. Saiga asks in surprise that if this army was defeated, does that mean that everything is over now? In response to the guy's question, the man nods his head in denial and says that, apparently, everything is not like that at all. Dewey's older brother also says that knowing that House Caputo has such a powerful sorcerer at its disposal, the kingdom, which does not have a powerful army, seems to be coming up with reckless ideas. He also adds that the way things are going, overthrowing the new regime that has just taken over Domino through revolution, is quite a difficult task. He explains that the kingdom may try to hire the sorcerer and Sansui as bargaining chips in order to prevent the outbreak of war. After the boy finishes his story and his sister Dewey tries to process what she heard, they both sigh heavily. Dewey's older brother continues speaking and reveals that ever since Sansui destroyed the royal guard on that fateful day, he has become its new head, while the royal family holds a grudge against the hero. Dewey, dejected, puts his hand to his face, sighs heavily again, and says that the royal family really does allow such trifles to color their judgment. Hearing this conversation, Heppen, Saiga, and Tsuga are genuinely surprised that something like this could happen. They clearly find it hard to believe. Finally, Father Heppen says that after this conversation, they will immediately head to the Caputo family's territory and asks all the boys to go with them. Dewey wearily says that if this is how things are, then there is no other way to act in their case. She suggests postponing the discussion of Sansui's new student until later, as they are now about to head to Caputo's territory. Suddenly, Father Heppen turns and addresses Suni and Tang. He says that for both of them, this problem is foreign and has nothing to do with them. The man says that he really doesn't want to impose himself on his brother and sister, clearly hinting that he is actually counting on their help. Suni immediately understands the hint and confidently declares that the people of Mahjong never run from a battle. It is noticeable that the girl is ready to offer her help. Immediately after her, Tung begins to speak. The guy explains that he has already caused Miss Pallet a lot of trouble, so if he can be useful to her, he does not intend to reject a request for cooperation under any circumstances. Sasnui, silently and calmly observing what is happening, understands perfectly well that Master Tongue will continue to travel with them. He also realized that in order to get Mrs. Dewey to become engaged to him, the girl will probably try to create circumstances that he will not be able to refuse. Deciding to make her mistress's plan a reality, Sansui approaches Tun, turns to him, and quietly asks that, if he does not object, the hero will continue to travel with his mistress. Tun, hearing such a request, looks at the delighted Du and her embittered brother. Suddenly, the master starts laughing loudly, which greatly surprises Sansui, and then says that even he is not so ignorant in this world. The guy says that for such an arrogant woman to show interest in him as a man, he couldn't ask for more bragging. Tun says that he can be the prince of Mahjong Kingdom, since he is not in line to succeed to the throne. Sun Yu looks at her brother sadly. Suddenly, the guy says that if Miss Dewey had agreed to accept him, then in his case, dedicating his life to a foreign kingdom would not have sounded such a bad idea. The girl, hearing such a speech, is completely delighted. Sansui and Seiga, hearing how Tun chooses his words correctly and beautifully, understand that he is a prince for a reason. At this time, a tense Father Heppen barely holds back his brother Dewey, who is shaking with anger, thereby holding him back from another possible attack. The heroes go to the Caputo Kingdom, where Palette, Kube, and the head of the Caputo family are waiting for them. This is exactly the kind of slightly unusual story that happened when the heads of great noble houses, such as Spade and Botcherable, decided to unite. The respective trump cards of these families, who were also their heroes, also participated in these events. It turned out that everything ended together on the territory of the Caputo family. At this time, two strangers appear in the story. A young dark-haired guy and a man gray with old age. Meanwhile, in the Caputo household, Palette is talking to the head of their family, who is the girl's uncle. The conversation takes place right after the court mage's attack on the Domino Empire Knights. The girl looks a little worried. Seeing the magician, she asks, "Is it possible that he was sitting near the crater formed after the fireball fell to the ground all this time, after the attack killed the knights?" The head of the Caputo family says, looking sadly at the boy, that it seems that he was not at all indifferent to what happened. The girl looks dejectedly at Kube, who turned his back to them, and asks if this is really so. The man decides that as the ones giving the boy orders, they should also be able to support him. Palette Caputo looks at Kube and decides that they absolutely must do this, as it is also their responsibility. Without thinking twice, the girl starts walking towards Kube, who is sitting with his legs dangling over the crater pit. The guy notices that the girl is approaching him, so he stands up abruptly and, clearly happy about her appearance, addresses her by name. Palette Caputo comes even closer to the mage and says that their family expresses sincere gratitude for what he did. Hearing such words, the guy does not know how to react to them. Suddenly, his face darkens, and he seriously asks if his action was really something to thank him for. It is noticeable that Kube is very worried about what happened. Palette, noticing the guy's mood, says upset that in this situation it was impossible to act differently, and if he had not used his magic, then there would have been many more victims from the Domino Knight's attack on Caputo's possessions. Kube turns once more towards the crater that was formed as a result of the fireball falling to the ground, and thoughtfully asks if there really wasn't any other way out of this situation. In response to this question, the girl says that this is indeed the case. Kube, clearly hoping for a positive answer to his question, asks again if after what he did, the war will finally end. Palette, in turn, gloomily replies that no, but she promises that they will definitely do it with joint efforts, since this is their common duty and responsibility. At this time, Du, Heppen, and their subordinates head to Caputo's domain, leaving the forest in carriages. Du turns and looks out the window, sighing heavily that Tongue, much to her regret, is riding in a different carriage. To this, the girl's brother replies that it is not surprising that the swordsman remained in the other carriage with his sister Suni, since for him, this is the most obvious means of transportation. There is an awkward silence in the carriage for a few minutes, while Sansui, Rain, and Brewer look reproachfully at the disgruntled brother and sister. Sansui decides to speak up and asks if there really were people in the forest who were looking for the master near the house. Brower immediately turns to him and replies that they believe the most suspicious parties are the Domino nobles who are taking refuge in Arcana. However, when meeting the mercenaries, Suiboki did not determine their origin. Rain turns to her father and, a little worried, asks him if they will be okay. Sansui, hearing her daughter's question, approvingly answers her that this is for sure, that everything will be fine, and the girl should not worry in any way. Dewey's older brother decides to join the conversation and says that the hero is absolutely right. He adds that no matter who these nobles are, Sansui and Brower will protect his sister in any case, if they must put their lives on the line to ensure it. The guy also adds that as the head of the Spade House, which rules the territory of the same name, he is tasked with protecting all the people living there. Dewey's older brother clenches his fist tightly and says that if it were necessary to protect all these people, he would gladly risk his own life. Suddenly, the guy turns to Crane and says that as far as he can tell, she is one of his people, so there is absolutely nothing for the girl to be worried about. Rain, hearing such words addressed to her, is delighted and says that Head's speech was really very impressive. The boy, in response to the girl's reaction, continues to say that as members of the Spade House, they are simply doing what is expected of them, and asks for confirmation of his words about his sister. Dewey, without hesitation, confidently replies that everything her brother said is the pure truth. The girl also says that whether it's the defeated nobles or the new Domino government or the Arcane family, they will never allow anyone to touch a single hair on Rain's head. Sansui and Brower, clearly impressed by their mistress's words, realize that the girl is not even pretending and is no different from an ordinary person. Meanwhile, in another carriage, an equally important conversation is taking place as the heroes travel to the kingdom of Caputo. The first to decide to break the silence in the carriage is Saiga. He turns to Tongue, clearly intending to ask him a question. Without thinking twice, the boy finally asks if the swordsman really thinks of marrying Miss Dewey. He also adds that this decision should be carefully considered, because this girl's brother can really kill him. Suni, hearing such words from Saiga, worries even more and excitedly asks her brother to think again about his decision, because it is too risky. Tongue immediately replies that before becoming the head of a noble house, he is just a brother, and for someone whose younger sister attracts so much attention, his actions are completely natural. Happen excitedly says that the previous head was also very attached to his daughter, so they will both try to kill the swordsman, who knows this very well. Tun, in turn, answers that such behavior is completely natural for a father. He also adds that once Saiga decides to introduce his people to his father, it would be better if he were prepared for the same reception in advance. Hearing such a warning, Saiga is horrified. His heart skips a few uneven beats, and the guy gasps anxiously. Tongue continues to reason that instead of leaving Sansui as his guard, Head chose to be prepared to go out on the battlefield. The guy says that Sansui is a great match for Head, and he is also much stronger than the Domino nobles. Suni tries to object and says that no matter how wonderful the new head of the Spade House is, she still strongly doubts that he will ever really accept Tongue as a groom for his sister. To this, the boy answers confidently and tells his sister to look at who is guarding Dewey, the foreigner Sansui, and the girl Bauer. He says that as long as their fighting skills are excellent, he will not reject anyone. Their conversations about possible marriage are interrupted by Father Heppen, who says that although the topic of their conversation is extremely interesting, he would prefer everyone in the carriage to focus on the new Domino. Saiga agrees with him. The man continues his story and says that in order to prevent the royal family from further escalating this war, the four great noble houses must join forces against it. Saiga says that he has already thought about this. Suddenly, the guy with eyes full of bewilderment suddenly asks why these four families are so persistent in trying to stop the war. Saiga explains that it's not that he wants war, but that the new Domino are the ones who invaded other people's lands. So if the Arcana royal family wants to respond in kind, he won't find it terribly unreasonable. Father Heppen answers the young man that the new Domino is very poor now, but they have a lot of earth. It turns out that Saiga's plan simply would not be worth it for the Arcana royal family to try to take this country. Saiga asks why this plan is not as good as it seems. The man says that if the only goal of the Arcana Kingdom was to destroy all the troops of the Domino Empire, then only the sorcerer of the Caputo family would be enough. However, in order to occupy all of this land, they would need a significant number of soldiers and the supplies needed to support those soldiers. In addition, they would also need to come from the Kingdom of Arcana. Father Heppen continues to say that it would be foolish to ignore their national interest just to raise the status of the Arcana royal family. Saiga says that he understands the man's thinking. Father Heppen also explains that it would not be them who would suffer from such a plan, but the soldiers on the front lines and the civilians who would suffer from additional war taxes. It is for these people that the four families must keep this war in check. For himself, Saiga understands that as a future leader, he too must see the big picture, as these are the responsibilities of the head of the family, which he will soon become. It turns out that in fact, a country was created in the kingdom of Arcana 300 years ago, leaving aside those who had very long lives, such as Sansui and Suiboki. He, the sacred sword X, had existed for a very, very long time. As has long been known, there are four great noble houses in this country that have the same power as the royal family itself. For many years, they, the outstanding warrior families, supported the royal family with military might even before the kingdom was founded. This union, as was said earlier, previously included four families, the first of which were the Spade family, the Botcherbull family. Also included in this union was a family that accepts adherents every generation. These are the compassionate, assimilated healers of the Caputo house. Besides this, the alliance also included those who had made a huge contribution to the royal family when a kingdom was first formed, the cursed merchant family called Dixia. It turns out that every generation the royal family gives away a territory of equal size to each family. With this land, they also grant a large number of powers. This may sound very good on paper, but in reality it means that of the 5 territories of the kingdom, the royal family only rules one of them. Whenever there is a time of crisis, these 5 families can unite to overcome it, but then the king will not be able to rule the country at his own will. Besides, his power is far from absolute. For example, when the Spade family made a clear move against the royal family when they lost Sansui in the elite royal guard, it turns out that this country has 4 heroic figures, popularly called trump cards. The Spade family has Sansui, the Betrebble has Saiga, the Capoodle has Kube, and the Diskia hero is still unknown. In addition, the kingdom also has 2 of the 8 divine treasures, such as. But despite this, it cannot be said that the royal family has direct access to them. While the 4 noble houses are worried about the recklessness of the royal family is afraid of the power of the noble houses. It wants a trump card for its own use, which is an extremely cute desire. Meanwhile, another important conversation is taking place at the Caputo family mansion. This time, the Stando Arcana is talking to the King of Arcana. The king is the girl's father, so she, calling him daddy, tells him how things are in some parts of the country. The girl also says that they won't be able to get anywhere near Fushiyukyu. The king replies that the man they are trying to reach is currently leading the new government and is the only one who has successfully managed to overthrow the Domino Empire. In addition, this character also owns 4 divine treasures and is in no way inferior to other houses and their heroes, which is not very good. The king says the problem now is how to get at least one of them for the use of the royal family. Stando tells him about his plan and says that this is the very reason why they must use this war to achieve their goals. The girl says that the kingdom has an overwhelming advantage, as most of their demands were accepted without resistance. She recalls how the Caputo family's mage attacked the Domino Empire's knights. The man sighs heavily and says that, despite all the planning, asking the leader to give up his divine treasures seems like a completely futile attempt. Stando says that in any case, they should try to attack them and create an excuse for such an act. The man expands on his daughter's plan and says that after this they can accept rivals, which could indeed give the royal family more leverage. However, continuing the war is far from being in their national interests, and the royal family will never receive approval from the 4 houses. Stendo does not give up so easily and offers his father to hand over more deserting nobles or offer food aid. It turns out that the invasion of the Domino Empire Knights into the Caputo family's lands is what led to this in the first place. However, they would have a hard time justifying giving aid to people who had just invaded their territory. Stando says that her father might surrender to the Arcan royal family if he succeeds. The girl sits nervously across from her father, fussing over possible options of what they can do to achieve their goal. Suddenly, her thoughts are interrupted by an insistent knock on the door. The person knocking turns out to be a knight. The girl immediately allows him to enter, and he apologizes for coming so suddenly that a domino nobleman named Nore has come here to see Stendo, as he wants to meet the royal family's magic at any cost. King Arcana asks if this nobleman is one of the deserters. Stando immediately asks why the knight did not chase the man away as soon as he appeared at the gate. The knight says that he did not do so only because Nure insisted that his conversion was related to the daughter of the Holy Sword. The king immediately asks if the knight is talking about the daughter of the Lightning Blade. But the girl simply remains silent. After considering his situation for a few seconds, Stando orders the knight to let the nobleman in and allow him to pass to the royal family. After some time, the knight brings Nure to the hall where King Arkan and his daughter are waiting for him. The nobleman, having crossed the threshold of the room, immediately begins to politely address the people sitting in the room, calling them Your Majesty and Your Highness. He says that it is a great honor for him to have the opportunity to meet them. Stando is immediately interrupted by a man who says that they can skip the introduction and asks him to tell them about the lightning blade as soon as possible. The girl asks if the nobleman has had any information about Sansui's daughter. Nurai, smiling evilly, says that Stendo is absolutely right. At the moment, rebels are raging throughout the Domino Empire, and now they call themselves the new government. The emperor and those associated with him have been captured and imprisoned. Stendo immediately asks how this concerns Sansui's daughter, to which Nure promptly replies that their great former emperor passed away 6 years ago, and in the struggle for the succession, many members of the imperial family were killed. He says that the child with the emperor's blood and her wet nurse went missing, and their whereabouts were unknown until now. Nurai continues his story and says that in order to protect the child from being used by the rebels, he searched tirelessly for her. And finally, his men found traces of the child's wet nurse. Vrinit says that just recently in one forest, the mercenaries he sent to investigate this matter met a boy dressed in clothes that were very similar to Sansui's clothes. The girl, hearing such a description of the man, immediately concludes that this was most likely a master of the lightning blade named Suiboki. Nure said that the boy told them that the woman had died and been buried, and the child had been entrusted to his student. The man says that there is no doubt that Suiboki was referring to Sansui and his daughter. There is evidence to support this assumption, namely the girl's hair, similar to the hair of the previous emperor, looks like beautiful silver. The king of Arcana, hearing this story, cannot believe that the daughter of the lightning blade is a surviving member of the Domino imperial family, to which Nure replies that this is absolutely correct. Nurai starts raving that this must be a providence from heaven, and if they unite with this girl, the sorcerer Caputo will fry all these rebels and revive the Domino Empire. The nobleman asks that the royal family lend them their help in this matter. The nobleman shouts loudly and asks if the king and his daughter could enlighten them on how they could benefit from all this. The king of Arcana says, a little excitedly, that Domino and Arcana have already had deep connections over many generations. Nurai bows low to the royal family, repeating the word please several times and saying that he begs them to help them. Stano suddenly says that the nobles can simply use any girl as their talisman. She asks what proof there is that Rain is really the emperor's daughter. Suddenly, a wonderful idea comes into the girl's head, which she immediately decides to share with her father. Stando enthusiastically turns to his father and quickly asks him if a man named Dainsleaf is in Ukyu's possession. The Arcana King says that his daughter is absolutely right, which means that this divine treasure will be easier to deal with. Nurai does not understand what the royal family is talking about. Suddenly, the man turns to the nobleman and seriously says that he will arrange a meeting for him with the heads of all 4 noble houses, and therefore will ask him to tell his story again there, but to them this time. Shirokuro Sansui is well aware that he lives in the Spade House as a trump card. The same trump card is in the Botchable House. This person in the other family is Saiga. House Caputo has what they call the most powerful sorcerer, and House Dixia apparently has someone as well. So each house has a hero. Finally, the 4 noble houses and their trump cards decided to gather and renew their bonds before meeting the king of Arcana. As Sansui realizes, Caputo and Dixia's trump cards apparently came from Japan, just like him. As the heroes head to the Caputo family, the hero looks out the window and wonders if God is going to send someone else to them. Finally, after some time of travel, the heroes finally arrive at the Caputo mansion. The first to enter the discussion room is the head of the Betriblo family, followed by Happen and Saiga. Immediately after them, the head of the Spade family, Head, his sister, Dewey, and Sansui enter the room. The head of the Caputo family looks after the guests with a smile on his face and thanks them for coming. Head cordially tells them that their kingdom is facing a crisis, so they couldn't help but show up for this meeting. The guy thanks the head of the Caputo family for sending the summons. The head of the Betriblo family also joins in this gratitude. The man shakes the hand of the head of the Caputo family and says that now that the houses have gathered, they will try to do everything possible to save the kingdom. The head of the Caputo family puts his hand to his heart and says that he is very glad that the other houses can really be relied upon. Finally, Quobi, the court magician, sees the arrivals. He happily runs to the other two heroes. Running closer, the guy deftly grabs Saiga's hand and shakes it, asking how he is doing. Still waiting for no answer, he decides to introduce himself and enthusiastically quickly says that his name is Sujo. The guy decides to be the first to ask the name of his new acquaintance and asks if his name is Saiga. Without waiting for Saiga's answer, the magician immediately puts forward new assumptions that his name is actually Sansui. Saiga awkwardly replies that his name is not Sansui after all, and he is also very pleased to meet you. The guy realizes that his new acquaintances are too hyperactive. The events are watched by the stunned Dewey and Happen, not quite understanding what is happening. Realizing that Kubi has just met Saiga, he quickly runs to Sansui and decides to meet him as soon as possible. Once again, without waiting for his interlocutor's answer, the guy remembers that the hero was recently in Caputo. He says that he was very sad that he was never able to meet the strongest swordsman. This time, Kube grabs his interlocutor's hand again, and, shaking it from side to side, joyfully declares that he is very happy that he was finally able to meet him. Sansui calmly replies that he is also very happy to meet him. Dewey looks at Palette reproachfully and asks who this guy is who just met her bodyguard. Confused by such a question, the girl answers that this man is the main trump card of the Caputo house. Dewey, continuing to watch Kube chat pleasantly with the other two heroes, says that she heard that this was the same sorcerer who was responsible for one massacre of tens of thousands of soldiers. After meeting Kube, Sansui remarks to himself with a smile that Caputo's house is very warm and friendly, and Saiga thinks that all its inhabitants are very nice. Suddenly, a man in long clothes enters the room where the three families are, laughing hollowly. Following this old man is a young, dark-haired guy. After finishing laughing, the old man asks what they have. He says that he sees a lot. The old man turns out to be the head of the Dixia house, and the guy following him is a man named Ukyo Shun. In addition, a tall, dark-haired, pretty girl also enters the room. She calls herself Pandora. The first to address the man who came in is Head, who says that he is very glad that he is healthy. The head of the Betrieble family joins in greeting him and says that having the Dixia family as allies is like having 100 more people. The head of the Dixia family immediately approaches the head of the Caputi family and, shaking the old man's hand, says that he is ashamed to make him travel such a long way for such a matter. The man, in turn, replies that there's no point in praising old people. Sansui notices the guy who came in after the head of the Dixia family. He understands that this guy is far from simple. The hero thinks that he feels nothing from this man, but a very ominous aura emanates from the woman standing next to him. Suddenly, the sword hanging behind Saiga's back begins to glow brightly, after which it turns into a boy and falls to the ground. X happily approaches Pandora and excitedly says that they haven't seen each other for a long time. It is noticeable that the girl is also happy to meet her old friend. Pandora looks down at the boy, as she is much taller than him. Saiga asks in surprise if XX is familiar with this newly arrived girl, to which the boy replies that the question is not very appropriate. He also adds that Pandora is one of the divine treasures, like XX himself. It turns out that the stately and majestic Pandora is a treasure called the Cursed Armor of Calamity. Upon seeing Saiga, Pandora immediately turns to the guy and asks if he is the new owner of X, to which he replies that the girl is absolutely right, having heard an affirmative answer to her question. Pandora begins to laugh mockingly at X and his master. Saiga does not understand the girl's reaction to his answer. She, in turn, turns to the sword and asks if its previous master really threw it away, even though he bragged about it so much. X becomes furious. Suddenly, Pandora turns towards Sansui and addresses him. She comes closer to the guy and asks if he is the student of that monster. The hero answers that if the girl means Suiboki, then she is right, and he is his master. Hearing this answer, Pandora's face immediately darkens and angrily tells Sansui to die in the fire. The hero, in turn, is very scared of such a reaction. Pandora starts to speak angrily about how this is like her worst nightmare. She thinks that a monster like Suiboki should never reproduce, as he is bad enough on his own. She says that this is outrageous. Suddenly, the girl abruptly changes her mood and with small steps heads towards the already familiar Shun, who still keeps a calm face, when she finally gets close enough to the boy. Pandora says there was no need to worry about what happens next. She suggests that he kill them all right now. After these words, Shun closes his eyes and asks Pandora not to act so funny. Pandora replies that such behavior is completely normal. She indignantly asks Shun why he was born if he does not do what he wants to do. The girl says that this situation is like YOLO. She also says that it is like putting every single thing into your heart and then just regretting it from the bottom of your heart. Shun dejectedly replies that I really need to shut up as soon as possible. The girl insultingly calls Shun, but then she still falls silent. Sansui, watching this, turns to X and asks him if his master really did something to Pandora. XX replies that about 2,000 years ago, Saboki used it to smash a girl to pieces and kill her owner. This upset Pandora quite a bit. Sansui awkwardly replies that the story is quite intense. At this time, the head of the Dixia family begins to look around fussily and ask where his granddaughter has gone. Suddenly, someone opens the door to the room. With a loud cry of greeting, the door to the room swings open and a girl runs in, saying that she is the next head of Dixia, and her name is Akril. It turns out to be a pretty girl with light hair, light eyes, and a wide smile. Suddenly, all the people in the room realize that the girl who ran into this room came here completely naked. Seeing this, Shin quickly rushes at the girl, grabs her, and takes her back into the corridor. This happens so quickly that not everyone has time to realize what just happened. Taking Akril out into the hallway, Shu furiously asks her why she dared to show up to the meeting without clothes. To which she replies that she secretly lent the guy her coat and thought it would show everyone what good friends they are. Meanwhile, Pandora once again wishes Akril death. Dewey dejectedly notes that Akril is the same as always. Happen turns to Saiga and tells him that as a future leader, he will have to figure out how to work with this lady. Pallet remembers that the girl has not changed since those days and how they were little. Chief Caputo says his colleague has a lot on his plate. Chief Dixie says it's sad when he has no one but Akril. Father Happen agrees. Head says the girl at least comes when the chief calls her. Suddenly, Kube declares that he is very glad that he was not taken by the Dixia house. Sansui and Saiga agree with him, realizing that truer words have never been spoken. Finally, the four heads of the great noble houses and the king have gathered to discuss how to deal with the new domino government. They are currently all seated at a round table in the conference room. The King of Arcana speaks first. He states that the first question concerns the recent battle. The man says that the House of Caputo has performed magnificently and asks for his thanks. After these words, the head of the House Caputo rises from his seat, bows to the king, and says that he does him honor. The man says that the advancing warriors were an army equipped with mass-produced weapons and armor and treasure. The king says that House Caputo did a good job of repelling them. Immediately after these words, the head of the Caputo house says that, as guardians of the eastern lands of Arcana, they were only fulfilling the duty assigned to them. Immediately after the head of the Caputo house says these words, he remembers the worried face of Kube, who single-handedly destroyed several thousand people. Immediately after, the head of the Caputo family again turns to the king and, with all due respect to him, asks him to allow him to express his opinion. The man begins to talk about the conflict that was provoked by the new domino government. He says that since they are a great nation, they feel it would be wise to seek peace. He asks if we paraphrase the words of the head of the Caputo house, it turns out that the man wants them to be merciful to the country that invaded their lands. Upon hearing this, the Caputo household leader replies that they have destroyed so many of the Domino Empire's troops that they must not have many soldiers left. As the man talks about this, he remembers the mage's fatal attack. Head of House Caputo says that in that case, even if they reconciled, they would still have few disagreements. The head of the house, Botreble, decides to stand up for the head of the Caputo house and says that due to the fact that the territory that was in danger belonged to Caputo, and those who repelled the soldiers' advance were also them, then everyone present must respect the wishes of this house. The head of the Botreble family also says that the invading army was completely destroyed, so there will be no stain on the honor of the kingdom of Arcana. It is noticeable that the king is not very pleased with this idea. Suddenly, the king of Arcana admits that he actually has a specific topic to discuss with all four major houses. He commands someone who is right now behind the door to enter the room in a level voice. All four heads look at the person who entered. The man slowly enters the room and sweetly asks for forgiveness for his, one might say, sudden intrusion. This man turns out to be Nurai. The King of Arcana says that he is a nobleman from Domino who came to these lands to find refuge. Nurai looks at the four heads of houses sitting at the table with a little arrogance. None of the representatives of the four families understands what a noble man from the Domino Empire is doing in this room at this time. Meanwhile, Nure bows demonstratively and says that he humbly presents himself before the esteemed Council of Arcana, and that it is a great honor for him to speak in his place. The nobleman says that during his private investigations, he unexpectedly came across some absolutely astonishing information. The man notices that the things he discovered concern the holy sword, Shirokuro Sansui, as well as the one who is well known as his daughter, a girl named Raven. All of a sudden, Nurad declares that this child is the true heir to the imperial family and, accordingly, their Domino Empire. Hearing such a serious statement, Head is overcome with indescribable horror, mixed with misunderstanding. He is so shocked that he cannot say anything in response to such words. Meanwhile, Nurai keeps talking about how, with the help of the sorcerer's power from the Caputo house, they will finally be able to destroy those rebels who call themselves the new Domino government. As the man tells this, he looks very pleased with himself and his own plan. The nobleman's face twists into a vile smile, and he almost looks like a madman. Nure says that they need to proclaim Her Highness Reign as the new empress, and then they will surely be able to restore the Domino Empire. The man, having lost his composure, declares that the Kingdom of Arcana not only can help them in such an undertaking, but it absolutely must. Finally, this crazy speech is interrupted by one of the heads of the four families. The man turns out to be the head of the Spade family. Head addresses Nurai, angrily calling him a mangy mongrel from Domino. The boy claims that his head has become quite large after being called out for a talk by the King of Arcana himself. Head, with great fury in his voice, says what nonsense the man is proposing to do. The guy sincerely does not understand how one can use his servant's child for one's own benefit, and therefore hastens to say that this is unacceptable. Head, practically glowing with anger, says that the best place for such an impudent head of Nure will be the ground on which it will roll. Hearing this, the nobleman begins to tremble with fear. Head's furious monologue is interrupted by the head of the Dixia house. The man tells the head of the Spade house to wait a bit, as such actions will simply stain the expensive carpets in the building with dirt. It is noticeable that the head of the Dixia house is also unhappy with what he heard. He turns to the King of Arcana and states that he cannot believe that the man would buy into such a stupid story. He asks warily if the king is going to help the man. The old man continues to talk and points out that Nure does not put aside a single coin to fulfill his goal, but still waits for the heads of the houses to take out their wallets to help him. The leader of Diksha says that it is unacceptable for them to use their kingdom's money to save another country. He also says that wouldn't such an act be a betrayal of the taxpayers of Arcana? Suddenly, King Arcan says that Nure's plans were in no way part of his own intentions. However, the man still asks the heads of the houses to think a little. He says that the leader of the new government, Fushi Yukyu, has imprisoned all the members of the Domino imperial family, and that he has one of the 8 divine treasures. This treasure is the blade Dainsleaf, which has an annoying ability. Suddenly, Head remembers with horror that the ability of this blade is that it can find absolutely any person who shares blood with the person from whom he was born. The king confirms the boy's words. He also says that if the daughter of the Lightning Blade is really a relative of the previous emperor of the Domino Empire, then he will not allow her to roam free under any circumstances. The head of the Spade family realizes with horror that little Rain could have been left with a huge burden, namely, the weight of the entire country. The Arcana King says that the boy is right in his thinking. He explains that this is precisely why simply establishing peace may not produce a good enough result. The King of Arcana once again addresses Nure, that perhaps his kingdom and the new Domino government will have to establish friendly relations in order to avoid problems in the future. The nobleman is indignant. Immediately after these words, the King of the Arcana calms down, sighs heavily, and, turning to Nure, says that he has done enough, so now he can leave the room. Hearing such words addressed to him, the nobleman blushes deeply with anger and, not knowing how to answer the king, stands in place and shakes silently. I just stayed like that for a couple more seconds. Nurai suddenly turned around, left the room, and then loudly slammed the door, closing the room. The King of Arcana realizes that he can now move on to another part of the conversation. The man straightens up and prepares to deliver his speech. He says that the feminine treasures, which have a total of 4 houses, all have different abilities. For example, an artifact called Ungaikyo is capable of creating copies of any man-made object. Another artifact, called the Vajra, gives its owner complete control over the weather. The one mentioned earlier, Dainsleaf, drinks the blood of any person he cuts, as well as other people who share their blood with them. And the last of them, an artifact called the Elixir, is capable of literally changing fate itself, making its owner avoid death. The King of Arcana says that the most feared ones for the enemy nation are Ungaikyo and Vajra. However, in this case, Elixir and Dainsleaf are causing the kingdom much more trouble. The man says that as long as the enemies have Dainsleif at their disposal, they can always find Rain, no matter where she runs. Moreover, if the enemies have the elixir in their hands, the Arcana Kingdom will not be able to defeat them. Not even a person who has the same overwhelming power as the Lightning Blade will be able to do so. The head of House Betrieval says that if everything the king said is true and Rain really is the rightful heir of Emperor Domino, then she will have to spend her entire life on the run because of this fact. Head says seriously and confidently that he has already given his word to Sansui and Rain that he will definitely take care of them. It is noticeable that the guy looks depressed and worried. Immediately after this, the head of House Spades says that if there is even the slightest chance that Rain could be a target, then they can't leave their enemies alone under any circumstances. The head of the Capoodle House is worried and says that they need to negotiate with Ukyu, but then their kingdom could lose its strongest swordsman. After this, the head of the Dixia family asks if sending aid will work as a pretext for talking to the opposition. He also notes that if they are satisfied with this plan, then their people are gone. King Arcana's face darkens, and his voice takes on a harsher tone. He says that this is the reason he has called all 4 heads to this meeting. They must work together to preserve the well-being of the kingdom. While the King of Arcana and the heads of the 4 noble houses were discussing how to deal with the new Domino government, Sansui and everyone else would also come to Sapporo Mansion or were staying there gathered in front of Sujo's house. The magician himself, seeing how many people came to visit him, is very happy about such an event and is not embarrassed to say so out loud. At this time, Chuga, who is sitting at the same table with Pallet and Kube, asks why both of these people are under the curse. The girl also explains that she can only say this because she herself is the sorcerer of the curse. To this, Sujo answers a little confused and awkwardly. The guy says that his magic used to be able to activate on its own, which is why he blew up his own house many times. As he tells this, Sujo remembers how worried Pallet was about him when she saw this. Suni, who is also sitting at the same table with him, repeats once again that Kube's magic can activate unconsciously, so that the boy will be able to destroy the building. Juga sarcastically asks if such a thing could really happen, hinting that it sounds very unlikely. Pallet, deep in thought, says that in order to prevent an accidental explosion of his magic, they use this curse, since they are the boy's guardians. It turns out that without Caputo's approval, the young man simply cannot use magic. Thus, he uses his talent. This time, Pallet also decides to mention the reason why Sujo remains to live in such a place, very far from other settlements. The young man, with a smile on his face, replies that it is good that he did not destroy his house. However, he also says that he is very afraid to live in the city center, both for himself and for everyone else. Kube says that it might be a little inconvenient to live so far away, but even with the distance, his home is still his home. At this time, Dewey watches Saiga having a nice conversation with Sansui and says that, in any case, Saiga really did just go and become her bodyguard's apprentice. Appin, sitting across from the girl, asks if there is any problem with this question, to which Lady Spade says that everything is fine. Suddenly, Dewey smirks and says that she simply realized that the future leader of the Batcherable house will soon be studying under her bodyguard. Hearing this, Appin becomes very angry. She yells at Lady Spade and says that if this is Saiga training, he will definitely surpass his teacher in no time. At this time, Brower and Rain simultaneously think that such scenes are extremely disappointing to them. It turns out that Rain has recently learned the truth. The girl was told that there is a high probability that she is a descendant of Emperor Domino. Having learned about this, the girl really became very worried. However, she is still able to act the way she always does. This is because all the people around her treat her well and she is not worried about it at all. Sansui realizes that the comrades he made with Rain are truly good people. Thinking about this, he looks at the people who have become almost like family to him. Suddenly, the hero turns and, addressing Saiga and Toon, says that it is time for them to get back to business. Sansui stands in front of the boys and says that from now on he will teach them both. The boy also adds that he learned the skill of ball handling from Master Suiboki. Tun and Saiga, hearing such words, enthusiastically thank Sansui for such good instruction. Pandora, sitting at the table, watches this picture, after which the girl says that in this situation, gratitude is in no way needed, since the transmission of the teachings of such a monster irritates her very much. Sansui, looking sideways at Pandora, thinks to himself that his words are truly painful for one of the master's victims to hear. At this time, Shun turns to Pandora and tells her that she knows full well that all Suiboki did was tear her to shreds. The guy thinks that this is not a serious reason to hold a grudge against the master. The girl instantly turns to Shag and stubbornly begins to prove to the guy that such old events have not bothered her for a long time. So, his remark is extremely inappropriate. Suddenly, Akril, who is sitting next to Pandora, addresses the girl and asks the girl why she hates this Master Suiboki so much. Pandora, after listening carefully to the question, immediately answers that her hatred is caused by the fact that this man has absolutely no weak points. Suiboki is absolutely flawless and absolutely invincible. It is as if he is stronger than all of humanity. Besides this, the girl also adds that she hates him also because he is immortal, so she can't say anything to him except the banal phrase, die. Pandora asks if Shun understood her, but he answers that girls are the best to die. Hearing Shun's words, Akril, who is sitting next to him, says that the guy is really cool. The girl says that she can't get enough of the disgust on his face and how he treats girls terribly. To these words, Akril Shun suggests that she should die too. Pretending not to have heard the conversation at all, Saiga persistently clears his throat and, turning to Saiga, tells him that he heard that he trained a lot in kendo. Saiga says that he has no skill at all, so he thought it would be better this way. Sansui asks if the boys want to learn from sword fights. When they don't answer, he says that they can't just aim for the opponent's head, body, arms, legs. In a real fight, there are many good targets. Thun, happy that his training has finally begun, carefully notes that the hero is right. Saiga, hearing his teacher's conclusion, asks if it is really okay to cut people's legs. Sansui is surprised by this question and thinks that if it were not so, there would be no point in the guy learning. He also recalls that his student often creates leg armor using support magic. The hero says that this is frowned upon in competition and is an important option. Sansui approaches Saiga and admits that most of the time, much of his power remains unused. A disappointed Dewey watches all this, after which she turns to Saiga and tells him outright that he is an idiot. Saiga, hearing this, is shocked. Confused, Sansui continues speaking and states that swordsmanship has a lot of freedom, and therefore it is better not to rely on any prejudices that swordsmen have regarding sword fighting. Dewey, still mocking, says it's because he's so simple that his thought process isn't even inspiring. An outraged Happen asks the girl to stop her speech. Sansui turns to Saiga and says that everything is fine, since this is how every amateur starts his path. Dewey does not miss the chance to laugh at Saiga here either. She once again recalls how much the young man was eager to get into a fight, which greatly angers Happen. Sansui turns to Dewey, who is still laughing, in confusion, and while Saiga is still not in the best mood, Tung, who is standing nearby, says that it is wonderful that Dewey does not mince his words. An indignant and angry Happen turns to the hero and asks why he allows his mistress to say such nasty things about her Saiga. Dewey, in turn, says that she continues to say all this only because she has not said anything bad yet, since all her words are the purest truth. Saiga, sitting on the ground, says that he has already made a decision, so he will try to do everything in his power. Watching this, Tung says that his comrade's fighting spirit is simply amazing. Happen looks at Saiga with inspiration and understanding that his path will be quite difficult. Thinks that he still cannot give up at the beginning, having practically just started. Sansui is happily offering Saiga and Tung to begin their training when he suddenly sees someone approaching him. The hero turns to look at the person. The man is getting closer to Kupe's house every second. The Kingdom of Arcana, the new domino government, are dangerous. Their tangled affairs have not yet managed to turn into complete chaos. But these people also have a question that concerns the birth of rain. While Dewey is talking to Happen, Both girls notice a middle-aged and not very pleasant-looking man approaching them. The hero realizes that he has his own responsibilities. Suddenly, the man who approached the heroes addresses Sansui. This man turns out to be a nobleman named Nure, who probably just left Caputo's domain. Along with him, two more knights approach the hero. One of them says that a lot of time has passed since their last meeting, and the other addresses the guy, calling him a holy sword with a baby face. Sansui sees these people and immediately understands that in order to protect his loved ones, he must fight. Meanwhile, in the territory of the new domino government, something is happening in a huge castle. In one of the many rooms of the mansion sits a dark-haired man with a chessboard in front of him. There are 4 objects near this man. It is noticeable that he is looking at the chess pieces very thoughtfully. The objects that are next to him lie motionless. These include a spear, a cup, a mirror, and a dagger. Deep in thought, the man talks about a sorcerer who could so easily defeat the forces of the new domino empire. As he moves the king to another chess square, he is very surprised that someone like this person lives in Arcane. Despite his words, you can't tell from the man's face that he is unhappy with the situation. He is, of course, surprised by what happened, but immediately afterwards, he says that they just wanted to play, and that a fair game of chess is not so simple here. Immediately after his words, the man suddenly gets up from the sofa and is very surprised to notice that someone so ill-mannered dared to interfere with their plans. Immediately after the man gets up from the sofa, the objects that have been next to him all this time begin to glow with a bright white light. The man, grinning, says that, of course, a loss is a loss, but losing a battle does not mean losing the war, so it is not the end. It turns out that the 4 objects next to the man are the same 4 treasures mentioned earlier. The man says that he will never give up and will fight until his very last breath. He decides that he will fight until the emperor's blood is spilled, and he is completely driven out of existence. Smiling happily at their new master, these 4 artifacts are also determined to win. Meanwhile, Nure, who had just recently left the Caputo estate, approaches Sansui and, trying to attract his attention, addresses him, after which he says that not much time has passed since their last meeting. Suddenly, this man notices that, to his good fortune, a lot of important people have gathered in one place. First, he looks at Dewey and Happen, and then he sees Palette, Pandora, and Acrylic. Nura concludes that despite the fact that the king and the heads of influential families have turned their backs on him, he can still try to influence their children. The nobleman decides that if the point is to convince these children, then with a little flattery, he will certainly succeed. It seems to the man that for someone with the same talent for persuasion, winning the kids over to his side is as easy as taking candy from a child. While the hero does not understand why the man approached him, the nobleman calls the guy a holy sword with a baby's face. Sansui instantly tenses up, turns to Nure, and asks why the man came and what he wants. After the question, the man's face immediately takes on a sugary, arrogant expression. He says, self-confidently, that it seems to him that the reason for his visit to the heroes is completely clear, since Mrs. Rain is the Empress of Domino. Suddenly, Nure turns to Rain and says that he came here to beg for alms since Mrs. Rain has already done so. It is noticeable that the girl does not understand his words. Immediately after this, Brewer comes up to her and calmly says that everything is fine and there's nothing to worry about. Sansui, hearing the man's words, says that Rain is no longer there. The guy also adds that she has long since secured her own place in the Spade House. Rain, hearing this, exhales with ease. Nure, however, continues to insist on his own, saying that even if this is so, Lady Rain still has the opportunity to become the Empress, and the heroes should want to support her in such a prestigious endeavor. She continues to talk about how the girl's becoming an Empress will definitely lead her to a truly bright future. Suddenly, Dewey decides to intervene in this conversation. The girl asks if the Spade House guarantees really seem so unreliable to this man. It is noticeable that she is also not very pleased with the visit of their old acquaintance. After such words of the girl, Nure immediately begins to justify himself and say that this is not what he meant. The man becomes very tense, finds herself facing Roar, finds herself face and blurts out for everyone to listen to. He says that there is no greater bliss for a girl than to become an empress. Nure explains that unlike the parliamentary system of the Arcan Kingdom, the Domino Empire is ruled by a single monarch. In this case, for the sake of the empress, the entire empire will move to carry out her every order. Nuri again starts talking non-stop about how their empress's decisions are absolute and her orders must be followed without question. And there can be no talk of disobedience. Anyone dissatisfied with the rule will be punished. Suddenly, after these words, Kube, who was sitting next to him, decides to intervene in the conversation. The guy pretends to be bored and, turning to Nure, says that this is exactly why their country was once destroyed. Pallet, who was sitting next to him, joins in. The girl says that this nobleman is focused only on his greed, and this is sad for the well-being of any people, since it makes them suffer. Nure, hearing such words addressed to him, instantly blushes, takes a couple of steps back, and asks what the girl is saying. Suddenly, he starts shouting that he doesn't want to hear such words from young people who haven't really seen life and can't know anything. Suddenly, Heppen intervenes in the conversation. The girl says that she thought that talk about the possibility of Rain becoming Empress was rejected by His Majesty the King of Arcana long ago. Nure falters and says that he means that he wants to expose those rebels who call themselves the new Domino government. The man also says that all those gathered in this place are the people who are responsible for the future of the Kingdom of Arcan. In pursuit of this better future, some effort will have to be made. Saiga, after listening to his words, says that he is right here, and all the guys are just future leaders. He also adds that now they are obliged to obey the decisions made by the king and the current leaders. Seeing how their beloved responds, Suni and Suga are delighted and smile tenderly. Tun also turns to the guy and says approvingly that he chose his words very well to express his thoughts. Suddenly, Akril starts laughing at the swordsman, calling them backwards. This laughter makes Nure turn around, surprised. The Echidna girl looks at the nobleman and, laughing, says that the House of Dixia is ready to cooperate with him. Hearing this, the man is very happy, while the girl gets up from her chair and begins to walk towards him. Finally getting close enough, Akril says that they will cooperate if Nure has enough money to pay them for it. She also says that they will be very happy to sell their military. Acrylic says they will set a fair price, so there will be no need to make a deal. The girl says it will be simple, tight, and clean. Right after that, she shows the man some gesture. The nobleman, seeing this gesture, insultingly calls Akril small, and the girl, in turn, turns to Shun and, laughing, asks why the guy doesn't say something too. Shun calmly addresses Sansui, Saiga, and Tung. The guy asks if he remembers correctly that all three guys were swordsmen or something like that. The nobleman, clearly angry, asks what this has to do with a possible deal. Shun, still addressing the heroes, says that there is no need to waste time talking to this man, calling him a toad. Shin also asks the guys to just come up with something and send Nore to pack his things the way he himself thinks is right. Looking at the nobleman shaking with anger, the guy adds that he will not be able to resist them in any way. Hearing such words addressed to him, the embittered man shouts that he cannot be in the company of these people. Nurai thinks to himself that each of the guys in this place is incredibly impudent since they dare to talk to him in such a tone. The man decides that he can no longer play games with the heroes. He's terribly angry and in despair. After Shun says these words, an admiring acrylic runs towards him, throws herself at the guy, and then hugs him tightly. Squeezing the young man even tighter, the girl says that she finds him very cool. However, the girl says that she thinks the guy went too far with his last part. Shun, hearing such an accusation against him, says that he simply said what he was thinking, so the girls should leave him alone. Suddenly, Acrylic gives Shun another few words about how great he is, then says that all the guys were a little harsh when talking to the noble. She also adds that the only one who didn't act that way was Dewey. Dewey smiles at Akril and says that the girl was paying close attention during the conversation, while Brower tries to figure out if Akril's words about Dewey were a compliment. Immediately afterwards, a slightly puzzled Suga asks if it was really for the best. A joyful Acrylic states that everything was normal, to which Saiga thinks that such a situation cannot be called normal at all. Smiling contentedly, Akril says that their country has long since decided to get rid of such people, calling them leeches. The girl also says that what follows after this depends only on what the person who has received power decides to do next. Acrylic states that if this man is a complete idiot, then even their royal family will want nothing to do with him. Suddenly, XX, hanging behind Saiga, intervenes in their conversation. The guy says that there are no problems here, and the rest should be put aside, since they know that among the remaining 4 artifacts, there is an elixir. Pandora, who is sitting next to him, says that she agrees with XX. The girl also states that as long as elixir is with them, Everything will be just fine. After her words, Tun, in turn, begins to think. This is immediately noticed by the attentive Saiga. He turns to the guy and asks if this is really what happened to him. Tun doesn't answer right away. Finally, he says thoughtfully, turning to Saiga, that, being a prince, a curious thought came to his mind. The man who seized power in the Domino Empire destroyed the powerful country and established himself as its new leader. The boy is genuinely curious about what this man is like. Tun can't understand if this man really wants to kill the girl Rain just because she has the blood of the former emperor. Tun decides that he is just a simple swordsman. At this time, Sansui grabs his wooden sword. Tun thinks that all he can do is hope that the person who seized power in the Domino Empire turns out to be someone reasonable. Meanwhile, in the new city of Domino, life continues to be in full swing. The busy streets are filled with citizens going about their business. However, the rumor of the defeat of the Domino House continues to spread in the city. People on the street wonder if their side will be okay. Some say that many people died in the war. Another is glad that they got rid of the nobles. So, day after day, the city gradually fell into panic. Everyone was wondering what the leaders of the new government would do and what decisions they would make. Meanwhile, the new leader of the country, Ukyu, has gathered his top brass in a meeting room to discuss pressing issues. Along with the top brass, there are also artifacts in the room. Ukyu looks very confident. All 4 artifacts standing next to him look no less confident than their owner. Ukyu begins his speech. The man says that before they begin their meeting, he would like to ask the others present about a recent loss on the battlefield. The first to answer this question is a man with white hair who is shaking in fear. Ukyu remembers that this man was the one responsible for external relations with the Arcana Kingdom. The man turns to the boy in fear, calling him chief. He says that, as he said earlier, they encountered a sorcerer who was capable of killing tens of thousands of people in an instant. The man says that he did not know what to do. Ukyu responds with disappointment, thinking that the man had a perfect moment for this. But he, in turn, did not take advantage of it. Hearing this, the man desperately shouts that the leader must remember that he was vital in the rebellion, and his talent was indispensable to the new government. Ukyu listens to the rest of his subordinates' words, and then, smirking, says that despite all his abilities, if the man tells this to the surviving families of the soldiers sacrificed in this war, they will definitely not calm down. The man says he didn't mean to comfort anyone with those words. He still tries to make his case, but he can't. Ukyu says seriously that he will make the man take responsibility for this failure. Ukyu says that the man will have to appear before the people whose family members he killed, and the charges against the man will be explained. After this, people will lynch the man, and their verdict will decide the fate of the guilty man. Hearing this, he is overcome with indescribable horror and begins to tremble even more. The man screams loudly, begging Ukyu to have mercy on him. He imagines the angry townspeople who will definitely not leave him alone after such an act. Ukyu looks at him disappointedly and says that if the man wants mercy, then it would be better for him to ask his comrades, the nobles, for it. Immediately after this, the guy orders 2 knights to pick up and take the man out of the office. They immediately obey the order, grab the man by the arms, and carry him out of the room. The man desperately begs and screams for the chief to give him another chance so that he can atone for his guilt. But the guy doesn't care about these pleas. The other nobles, seeing how Ukyu treated their mutual comrade, are completely horrified and also begin to tremble with fear. Finally, interrupting their excited whispers, Ukyu places his palm on the table with a loud slap. The guy says that this is what he really wants to talk about now. Ukyu menacingly asks why, after losing only one battle, their country must now make peace with the Kingdom of Arcana. The nobles, hearing this question, are confused and horrified. Ukyu asks the same question again, but in a more angry tone. He asks why their country simply gathers all their divine treasures and goes and gives them a polite greeting. Ukyu states that they must do everything possible to create better living conditions in the country. He says that they must resort to asking for forgiveness. The guy looks at the council he called and says that until he gets back, all these people will have to come up with plans in this direction. Suddenly, one of the council members realizes that their leader will be out of the country for some time, which they can take advantage of. But Ukyu, having almost immediately figured out the plans of the council members, says that one rule will apply during his departure. Ukyu explains that if any of the council members dares to do something strange while he is away from the state, then that person's failure will be natural and inevitable. If someone tries to escape from the state without taking responsibility, then there will also be a punishment for that. Hearing this, the people in the room are indescribably horrified, and their leader, in turn, looks at Dainsleif standing nearby and says that the punishment will be the murder of all the families of those who fled. The guy explains that the people in the room need to take responsibility for their actions before they die. If they don't want to die, they'd better do their best to come up with good plans. Ukyu looks reproachfully and threateningly at everyone present in the hall, after which he menacingly asks if they understand what he just said. After this difficult conversation, Ukyu returns back to his chambers along with the four treasures. He tells them about his impressions about the recent conversation. The guy says that it was quite hot in the hall, and it seemed to him that he was deceiving the internal administration or something like that. Ukyu says he's supposedly running the country, but he feels like he's playing some kind of simple business simulator. The guy says everything around him is trash. He clearly doesn't like it. One of the four artifacts, the elixir, approaches Ukyu and asks that its master not be disappointed. Ukyu says that just a couple of days ago, thousands of his men died. The guy says that he is disappointed, which is not the right adjective to use for him. He also says that now he must go to the enemy country. The tall, dark-haired girl, Ungaikyo, sitting next to him, replies that no matter what the conditions might have been, the people in this country were simple farmers who were given garbage. Ungaikyo asks Ukyu if now is not the perfect time to leave all things in her capable hands. But the boy does not answer her. Instead, the blonde sitting next to her, Valdra, reacts to the girl's words and, laughing, says that she is an ordinary stick that can move around the clouds and grow a little. So her words are simply funny. Ungaikyo looks menacingly at Vajra and approaches her. It is noticeable that both girls are not friendly towards each other. Ungaikyo says menacingly that she is a spear. The girl also adds that, as she sees, small tools like Vajra are true to their size and are just as petty. To this, Vajra, quietly laughing, replies that even as a large instrument, the caliber of Ungaikyo is even smaller. The girl menacingly asks Vajra what she just said, calling her a blunt knife, to which she replies that Ungaikyo's pettiness matches her smallness. The girls are ready to pounce on each other, but Ukyu separates them and tells them both to stop arguing. These words immediately catch the attention of the cheerful elixir. He laughs happily and says that Ukyu chose his words well. The guy also adds that this is what makes him their master. Elixir, looking at the girls, says that they both think with all their hearts about how they can be useful to the guy. After this, Elixir happily approaches the guy and asks if the thought of this shouldn't make him smile, to which Ukyu wearily replies that nothing could be further from the truth. Elixir says that he sees everything. The boy turns to the girls and tells them that it would be much better if they calmed down their passion right now. Ungaikyo wants to object to Elixir, but he interrupts her. The guy says that their master is about to head into enemy territory, so now is the time for the artifacts to put aside their differences and work together. Ungaikyo looks menacingly towards Vajra and says that the girl should be grateful for Elixir's intervention in their dispute. Vajra, in turn, arrogantly says that exactly the same can be said about Ungaikyo. Ukyu dejectedly says that he wishes Elixir had silenced the girls much earlier. Hearing this, Elixir begins to laugh merrily. He says that it is good that Ukyu is willing to give his life for his country, but it is not yet time for their master to do so. At this point, Dainsleif also intervenes in the conversation. The girl says that her master still has to fulfill what he truly desires. Ukyu menacingly says that he completely agrees with her and is not yet going to humbly offer his head to his enemies. Ukyu remembers that terrible day when many people in the city were killed, and he and his artifacts stood before the tablet, standing in a pile of rubble in the pouring rain. The tablet said that by order of His Excellency, the city of traitors was punished for failing to reverse the divine pleasures. Ukyu, reading what was written, could not believe that the authorities had killed all the people living in the city. Then Ukyu, filled with hatred for those who could commit such a terrible act, swore that such a deed would not go unpunished. On that fateful day, Ukyu swore that he would destroy every drop of the Emperor's blood from this world, even if it killed him. Meanwhile, something is happening again in Kabuto territory. The house leaders stand on the walls surrounding the city, looking at the crater created by Kube's attack. The head of the Kabuto family remarks that it looks like someone has finally arrived. The Arcana King agrees with him. As the head of the Caputo family looks at the king, he says that once their enemies see this scar of destruction, they will definitely lose all hope of fighting the Arcana Kingdom. Chief Caputo, in turn, seriously says that he is confident that their enemies will continue to fight no matter what. The King of Arcana says that he understands what the head of the house wants to say. He also adds that the dignity of the royal family is nothing in the face of conventional interests. The king says that if these people intend to harm his kingdom, then there is no need to play the farce. At this time, someone enters the city gates. The king says that if he decides that they lack integrity, they will ask him for reparations and go home. The knights, also standing on the wall, listen carefully to what the king says. The man confidently says that in any case, first they must put an end to this terrible war. At this time, a carriage arrives at Caputo's domain with Ukyo and his artifacts inside. The carriage stops and they all get out onto the street. People confidently walk towards Caputo's mansion to begin negotiations. After some time, they enter Caputo's mansion and go to the guest room, where they are accompanied by one of the knights. As soon as the door slams behind the guy, he sits down on the couch, and his magical artifacts turn into ordinary objects and appear with him. Yukio waits for someone to come talk to him. Meanwhile, outside the door of the room where the new head of the empire sits, there are several people wearing hoods that cover their faces. Meanwhile, Nure asks his subordinates, sipping a cocktail, if everything is okay with them and going according to plan. One of them says there is no need to worry, and the sorcerer's hut is located at Caputo's residence. He also adds that the bandits they hired are already on their way to her. However, this guy also says that there is one small but. He remembers how Acrylic, Pandora, and Rain were sitting next to each other in the room. The guy says that Lady Rain is also in this hut. Meanwhile, the unsuspecting heroes are in Kube's hut, chatting carefree. The mercenary says that the bandits didn't receive orders to secure the Rain, so they sent some of their elites. Nure orders the mercenary that he and his comrades should make sure that the girl does not get any injuries. The mercenary, hearing this, bows and says that everything will be done. Nure, sipping a glass of iced liquid, says that the heirs of 4 noble houses are also in this hut, and he doesn't know what to do with them. The nobleman smiles wickedly and orders the mercenaries to kill them. He also adds that as long as Rain remains alive, the mercenaries have free reign. The mercenary replies that he understands, and Nure's face twists into an even more crooked grin. He says that if the heirs had supported him, he would have spared them. The nobleman also remembers that suddenly the rebels disappeared somewhere, but not only the sorcerer but also all the heirs will die. Nuri thinks that if they make mistakes, the war will only get worse, and then something else will happen. Darina understands that if the market seems to be in his hands, then he will naturally be appointed to a very respected position after the war. Nure also concludes that one of his most foolish mistakes was trying to decide to join forces with the rebels, Yukyu, and his artifacts. The nobleman understands that the only thing he is sure of is that the king and the heads of the 4 noble houses will definitely regret not listening to him. Nure is thinking that once they realize that his proposal was right, he is very interested to know how they will ask for forgiveness. While the nobleman is imagining this, he smiles nastily. He suddenly turns to the mercenary and asks if the heirs of the 4 noble houses brought their escort. The mercenary replies that the hut contains Rain's adoptive father and the owner of Pandora, but there are no other heroes. Nure, in turn, says that, from what he heard, even if the owner of Pandora was dying, he would still be able to kill another 100 people. He recalls that the Holy Sword is also as strong as it was said out loud. But he's just one person who can't do much. I was shown that a sorcerer cannot use his spells freely. The nobleman orders the mercenary to tell the bandits to kill all the heroes and then send them somewhere. The guy replies that everything will be done. Nure smiles slyly and says that he is confident that everything will go as he planned. He happily says that this war will not end until the rebels are completely destroyed. Meanwhile, at Caputo's mansion, 3 mercenaries are waiting for Ukyu outside the door of the room he is sitting in. One of them says that the guy does not need to be killed, but only tied up. Just as the 3 people are about to enter the room, the door suddenly opens by itself, throwing the mercenary standing next to it aside. Ukyo comes out of the room, holding a spear in one hand and a dagger in the other. The boy asks if these people are trying to kill the revolutionary, already knowing the answer. Yuka takes a quick step towards one of the mercenaries and stabs him in the chest with both the dagger and the spear at once. The dagger sucks out the mercenary's blood. Yukyu smugly says that these guys will have to try to do the same thing again, but only in 100 years.